Call the meeting to order. It's the November 18th, 2019 meeting of the Addison Northwest School District Board of Directors. And I'm looking for a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Is there any discussion or changes for the agenda? Okay, all in favor of adopting as posted, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? All right, we have a couple action items.
I move that we approve the minutes of October 21, 2019.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to approve the minutes of October 21. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? Okay, there's a hire for action.
I move that we approve the hire of Noah Herbert for our interim MS science teacher.
Is there a second? Second. Second by Laurie. Any discussion? Christina?
Okay, I had a question about that.
Sheila, did you want to say anything?
Well, in my report, I have the first, Noah's experience, his work history, where he got his degree. Seems like he'll hit the ground running.
Okay.
Looking for an approval.
Great. Any other comment? Okay, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed or abstaining? All right, thank you and welcome to Noah Hurlbert. That brings us to board and committee reports, the superintendent's report. Do you want to add anything?
I would add one thing in the cell on your first page, the policy D6 class size. The cell for English composition should not be highlighted in red. I tried to highlight the ones that were not in alignment with our minimum or optimum policy, and that one fits within the range, and I don't know why that got colored red, but basically just how this is determined is you take the number of students, like say for the elementary, the total number of students divided by the number of teachers to get the figure. In the case of Addison, where you see we're out of alignment with K through 2, we have 2 teachers in that grade span of those 3 grades, and there's really no other possible way to configure them differently, so there's nothing that can be done to bring that into alignment. We would have 28 students, for example, in one class if we had just one teacher. So there's not much that can be done there. And then with the other, with the 9 through 12, all content areas except those listed below is any core content subject matter. So social studies, science, English that's not composition, math. So it's the total number of sections, total number of students divided by the total number of sections, and that gives you the average per course. So that's how that's determined. Yeah, a little low, and I think the challenging thing with high school schedule is that in order to maintain flexibility and options within the schedule, you have to have a number of sections, or students don't have anything to choose from. For example, if they took biology in a certain period and that's the only period it's offered, then they don't have anything left for any of the other courses. So there's sometimes not a lot of flexibility with how to reduce a section. Reducing a section in social studies or something like that, for example, doesn't necessarily really address this issue. But it's something that we look at throughout the budgeting season, and if ever there's, an opportunity to reduce, but a section in one content area and another is not all the same teacher, so it's hard to reduce by one teacher unless, it's one content area where we're seeing the lowly enrolled classes, which in this case it's not, so.
Do we know well, we know what's coming in. Is it going to get worse next year on all of these?
Well, it's something, again, that we can look at through the process, and also if we have teachers taking advantage of the early retirement incentive, we will really evaluate whether or not we need to replace those teachers that might be exiting. So we'll run some scheduling scenarios and see if we can, not end up replacing teachers that might retire early in any of these content areas. So we may be able to make some improvements, I guess is my answer to that. If there is a way, we would.
So I think what I'm asking is next year's kindergarten class going to make a significant difference in any of these?
Sorry, I thought you were speaking about the high school. I don't see that changing with Addison, no, I don't see that changing.
And Ferrisburg over the years?
Yeah, they're
Not significantly.
not significantly,
Sheila, was it, our advanced course is just AP?
yes. Or the highest level of any world language. Mhm.
Couple of music courses we could consider higher level.
Those aren't factored in here, though.
Anything else on this? Thank you.
And the verbal update for the retirement incentive is going to come in executive, is that?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so the rest of your report.
So, just upcoming, we have an ALICE training plan. ALICE, as you recall, is the Alert, Lockdown, Inform, Counter, and Evacuate model of what to do in the event of an active shooter. So we're running a simulation training next week. This is, of course, a really sensitive topic, and it's a difficult one for our staff to have to work through, but it's equally as important that they have the experience and the knowledge to be able to respond in these events. And the important thing to know about this training is it's good for anyone, because these types of things can happen in any public setting, not necessarily just a school. So it's transferable, these skills that we're learning. So other than that, Vermont has really started to focus on public safety and re-upping all of the emergency operations planning and the recommendations to us as a school system. So just last week, Thursday and Friday, we sent a team. Glory and Ken and Gary actually went to a training that was offered down in Middlebury. And we will be looking again at all of our procedures as a result of this training and making some updates to those to train staff. So this is just sort of an ongoing piece of work that we keep focused on. I won't put you on the spot and ask you. We have not had the chance to debrief at all, so.
And new public records request.
Yeah, so this is really as a result of all of the public records requests that are coming. Sometimes they're coming to an administrator in a building, sometimes they're coming to you as board members. They might be coming to me or Elizabeth, rarely both of us. And, we have a responsibility to respond to those in a timely way, and we're obligated to respond. So we really need a centralized way to track what's being requested, to make sure that we're following up in time. So we're really feeling the need to put this procedure into place. So you can read through it, but basically any public records request that comes through should be forwarded to Elizabeth, and she'll, it doesn't mean she's filling the public records request, but she's the centralized hub for those coming in, and we'll keep track of the requests. It could be that a request comes through and the same thing is requested a few days later, so that's good to know too, because we don't have to go through all of the work again. So there's a lot of advantages to us keeping track of it this way. Not to mention keeping an eye on our employees' time, just to be aware. We have had an increase in the number of public records requests, and we have spent a significant amount of time in our office gathering up what's been requested and responding in a timely way. So just feeling the need to keep better track of that in general. So any questions about that?
I have a quick question about the ALICE training.
Uh-huh.
What is the data or evidence to prove that this is effective in increasing student safety?
There's a lot of evidence. I don't have it with me right now, but I'd be happy to follow up with you and send you the research and the backing for it. Una?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I know I have a constituent that asks a lot of questions, and I just received an email from her a few minutes ago. And she, at the final sentence is, I continue to wait for an explanation of FY18 transfers. That is not a public information request.
Right.
Right, it's an explanation.
Right, and we have no obligation to
Not
do
legally,
that
no.
as the business office. We have no obligation to explain,
Right.
although we don't want to be,
And I believe we normally would. It's just a matter of how much time do people have to devote to
Okay.
the really
Sure.
the constant questions
I-
that we receive. So
I read these
So we're kind of
emails.
going down to the level of having to, knowing we have to respond to a public records request. If we have a document that we can provide to them that exists, then that's a public records request. But if we are just trying to explain something, that's a completely different kind of request, and
Yes,
there's
I
just not
understand
enough
that.
time.
And what I'm saying is should we be making a distinction? Like, dear community member, this is not an FOI, it will take time to do this, or something to that effect.
And we have responded in that way, just to say, we're unable to provide a detailed explanation of this at this time. You'll find information about this here, whether it's an audit or a past budget report or something, we can redirect and help them find the information on our website, but in terms of helping to interpret it or explaining it, if it's a simple explanation that takes no time, obviously we'll do that, but in the event that it's something that's really quite difficult to go into in an email even, right? Some of these concepts are really complicated, and it just takes so much time to try to explain that we have responded sometimes. We can't.
I guess my point is, if it's not an FOI request, it should be stated as such, right? The response should include, this is not a public records, because the person requesting it might think it's a public records request. And so I think we should be really clear with our responses. This is an FOI, or this is not an FOI. And we're obligated to respond for public record requests, but not necessarily for requests. We're required to respond in 10 days to public records requests. Other requests can take a lot longer. True, correct?
That's true, yeah.
Okay.
So this policy is now in place.
Right, and it's a
Sorry, this
procedure,
is now-
yeah, so we were waiting to sort of reveal it here today, and yes, I've spoken to the administration about it, and so, yes, officially we'll go into this, and, an email suffices. They don't have to fill out the form that's attached to this. It just provides a framework for making a request if they're not sure how. So that's what the form's all about, but if somebody sends a request in an email, that's fine as well.
So any public records requests that are received, forward to Elizabeth.
Forward to Elizabeth, and she'll see that it gets handled or responded to if, we don't have the information. There are times when people make requests for things that we, for reasons of confidentiality or something, or, we can't provide that, and so we respond and say that this doesn't fall under this request. We can't, we're not able to share that information with you.
Is there actually a request form? I'm missing it.
There is a form, it's attached to this.
It might not be in
No, I don't
the
It
think
may not be
you
to
are.
yours.
On the
but
website,
there is
maybe?
on the website.
It's on the website.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right.
It's just basically name, information you're requesting, so forth.
I'll just say that, I've thought about this in terms of policy, and I've looked at tons of different school districts, and I would say, the bigger ones certainly all have this, and it looks almost identical to what we're talking about here. It's not like this is out of the ordinary. Burlington, South Burlington, CVU, others have this almost exact language about, because the law is the law. I mean, you have to do it.
Right.
So, and this will show up as a policy or procedure on the board policies and procedures page?
Well, it's on the website now, I believe.
Is it linked, do we have a policy that it would be linked to?
Not really?
It's sort of just, I
Yeah.
think it's just an
It's
It's just a
administrative
form
procedure.
on
All
our
right.
website under the, I think it's under the business, isn't it? It's on our quick links, I believe.
Is it under my department?
Community engagement.
We'll double check. We'll make sure it's really obvious on the homepage, though.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Okay.
So just a really quick note, I don't
Yeah.
want to dwell on this,
Okay.
but, I think this is good because it clarifies but also preserves the rights of individuals to make these requests. And
Right.
so that's essential. And for anybody, you know, we talked a little bit about requests that come outside of this. Lori was asking about requests that are not for an actual document that already exists. I don't want anybody to get the perception that we're trying to create barriers. The real story behind all this, and this is more for people in the public, is there is one individual for whom I would guess many thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars in staff hours a year are spent answering questions. And so this is not about anybody trying to decrease the amount of time we spend. We have a legal obligation to handle these. But at a certain point, I don't know, I've always wondered if there's some limit to how much additional time a school district should dedicate to answering the questions of one individual. And I don't have an answer for that, but I just appreciate that you put a policy together to at least help us to get a handle on it. None of this is about not answering an occasional email from somebody. Thanks.
Anything else for Sheila on her report? Anything on her report? Okay, then Director of Finance and Operations report.
So I'm hoping everybody has read their report, right? Knowing that you read it, that's good, because I don't want to read through the whole second section of this, but I do want to give an update with regards to the information in the report regarding the FY19 audit. I was able to talk to the auditors again on Friday. And basically, they have determined that the issue that we found with the benefit withholding liabilities is definitely a prior year issue. It's not something existing that transpired because of the rollover into FY20. It's not something that existed because of anything that was expensed in FY19. It is a prior year issue, most likely due to consolidation, changeover of health plans. We even changed how we were expensing the health insurance premiums during that first fiscal year of consolidation. So basically what they're going to do is have us restate the beginning balance for FY19, which really means it's restating your final number for FY18. And that's not a great thing, but at least it gets it done. It's kind of like ripping off the Band-Aid. So what that means for us is, the recommendation is, had we known this was the case when we approved the food service transfer in FY19, we would have not have done so because we would not have had that money to give to them. So the recommendation is to reverse that transfer and deal with that $49,000 issue in the current fiscal year as a board. Basically, you could reauthorize using current year money to fund that $49,000 deficit instead of doing it in FY19. And then also, even doing so, we will basically be short. And when I say this, I call it a deficit, and this is the tricky part. I call a deficit something where we had unplanned and we have restricted money in such a way that we don't have enough to cover that restriction. When you get an audit, it's not going to show a deficit fund balance, because it's still going to show that you had money at the end of FY18, that you had money at the end of FY19, but you have reserved $480,000 of that FY18 money towards this year's budget, right? FY20. And so to me, it's a deficit because it's coming below that 480 that you've already restricted and reserved. And we're short by about $19,000. So the update is that instead of it being 30, it's 19 that I'm short, even after we reverse the food service transfer.
Which we will do at the next meeting?
I can reverse the food service transfer because you guys authorized it as an up to amount, and if we didn't have the money, we didn't have to do it. So
Okay.
I can go ahead and reverse the transfer as is, but in order for you to decide to fund that deficit in the current year, you would have to, yes, do it at the next board meeting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I ask, this may be a dumb question.
No dumb questions.
There are, but
This is confusing.
why is it better to, so we're taking the money from one pot and putting it into another pot, and you're telling us that it's better to have it in this pot and not that pot. And could you explain why it's better to clear the thing that was discovered as opposed to the food service?
It's more like going back to as if we had known that issue when we actually.
And we never would have done that,
We
yes.
never would have done it.
Right.
And so that's more of the reason behind it. It's basically saying, had you known you had this issue, you would have been showing that you didn't have enough money in your general fund. So giving money to your food service program when you don't have the money doesn't make fiscal sense.
So it leaves
in your-
a
it just
cleaner
doesn't.
record.
It's a cleaner record. It's
Okay.
basically pulling that back out and saying, whoa, had we known this, we wouldn't have done it.
Right.
So basically, you don't want to give money you didn't have, basically.
But that means we'll have our food service will have a deficit that, I don't know what the right word,
The
it'll.
food service program will end FY19 with that deficit of $49,000 for FY19. And if you, as a board, authorize to fund that deficit in FY20, I will be tasked with having to go into our current year budget and find where I can pull that out, basically, and reserve it so that we don't spend that $49,000 in the current year on anything else.
Which we shouldn't do. Just in general, we should
Right.
try to avoid things like that.
Yep.
And the 19,000 deficit will be at the end of fiscal year 20.
The $19,000 additional amount that we need to come up with, I am putting in as a deficit rolling forward in the FY21 budget. We basically have to raise taxes by that 19,000.
And do we know
It's
how?
basically decreasing, it's decreasing your revenue by that 19 to try to drum up that extra to cover it. So by the close of FY21 technically is when it will disappear by doing that.
And you said it's a prior year issue, but we don't know.
We don't know whether it was us calculating the health insurance premiums incorrectly because of the transition, or if it was a software glitch in our software program when we transitioned how we are paying for our health insurance benefits. And if we all remember, that's the same fiscal year that all the VHI, Blue Cross Blue Shield's plans changed as of January 1, so right smack in the middle of the fiscal year. So there's like 3 huge changes to health insurance that happened all in that same fiscal year that was your first year of consolidation.
Questions?
Yeah, so we withhold money from our employees
Yep.
to pay the health insurance.
Yep.
We write a check for the net payroll, and the difference, the withholding amount, gets left in the general fund, right? And then when we get an invoice,
Yep.
we take that money plus our share, the school board share, the school district share, and pay it out.
Yep.
So if we end up with a debit, seems to me we didn't withhold enough money from our employees.
We didn't expense enough from what the auditors are seeing.
If we didn't expense enough, then we owe somebody money.
No, we didn't, it's our side of the expenditure, it's our premium side. It's not what we withheld from employees that we didn't pay out. It's what we paid more out to VHI, Blue Cross Blue Shield, for premiums than what we actually posted to our expenditure lines in a prior year. And we actually went through and checked every single VHI bill to make sure they didn't this was a whole gamut of,
Okay.
you know, did
prepay
they
on the
did
balance
they
sheet?
bill us too much, or what, you know, we went through every different scenario of either they billed too much, nope, that's not the case. You know, so basically reconciling the withholding account. The other problem with what I see is that your liability account in the past used to have all of your benefits running through it, so it's very difficult to reconcile that when you've got every single benefit running through one withholding account. So this year, as we were going through this and discovering this, we actually have broken out all the benefits to have their own withholding accounts, so that at the end of this fiscal year, we can clearly see how much was health insurance, how much was dental, how much was disability life, for the employer and the employee side going through that withholding account. so that this doesn't be allowed to happen again.
An expense account, we debited it.
A
balance
liability,
sheet
a liability account, yeah. But if you look at the computer system, it's hard to tell how or why that happened. It's not cut and dry, you know, black and white, oh, this didn't post correctly, so.
And the total is 49 plus 19? Is that what it is?
That's the net result.
78?
The actual total of the overall is basically like 2 months' worth of health insurance. It's $210,000. But because we had surplus money in the current year, it doesn't affect us by only the 19 and the 49.
And current year, you mean FY19?
FY19, sorry. Yeah, current year's 20. I'm talking in 2 years.
More questions for Elizabeth?
Yeah, I wanted to know what community service operations is. And in general, we've made a lot of changes to the budget. It's one of the line items in the expenditure budget, and I'm sorry.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and it's one of those lines that goes from no budget amount to
Yep.
a revised, right?
Yep,
So, and I'm
so
just not familiar
that's a
with it.
change in coding, and basically, it's your after-school programming. The state deemed that certain portions of the after-school program should be coded as a community service and not as part of your general education budget, and we had it coded as general education. So we had to move the coding. So you'll see some other function codes drop
Yeah,
in the same amount that that 3,300 community service goes up.
So that brings me to my next question. When we look at the FY21 budget and the, our 2021 budget and the FY19-20 budget, 20 and 21, are we going to be looking at the revised budget in comparison to the current year, like the going forward budget? Are we using, because there's so many changes, I want to make sure we're using the right one to make good decisions.
So we do change the budgets as we learn these things. So if something has
course.
changed in the current year,
Totally.
we're rolling that forward into the new budget so that we're using those new coding structures in the new budget.
So you're using the revised
What you won't
budget.
see, though, unfortunately, is kind of that history. You know, if you're
There's no
looking at a
historical
line
trend.
item, if you see the line item and before it was there and now it's here, you're gonna see zeros in prior year history on this one and then zeros on the extended year history on that one, you know, so you're always gonna have that, oh, where did that go? Kind of question just like yours about the current financial statement, until you got enough years. But we get these coding changes all the time, so I think this is something that happens, it's gonna happen to you more frequently right now because they're changing their whole coding structure, but,
So that year when
yeah.
the unified code goes into effect.
I don't have a
we're-
whole lot of faith that those changes are gonna stop, to be perfectly honest, just watching the unification of the coding so far. I feel like they come
We're
out with
gonna live with this
changes.
for a while.
When they decide that they have something else they wanna see, you know, they wanna pull out different statistical information, they might change the code on something.
And
So I
then we
think-
can't get
Yeah.
historical information on that particular account. It's so frustrating.
Could you remind everybody who's the they here?
The state of Vermont,
But, I mean,
Agency of Education.
Agency
yeah,
of Education.
they're responsible for some code changes.
Yes, so, well, all the code changes. They basically are, they're trying to build a uniform chart of accounts that we will all have to move to at the end of this fiscal year. It's been delayed like 3 times. And during our measuring up to that time, we are already starting to transition to some of those codes, because when we report at the end of any given fiscal year, even if we're not on that chart structure yet, we have to report that way for the current year. So it makes it easier for us to just make the change when we are told, so.
I wonder if it would be helpful for us as a body, if when you're making big changes, you could alert, like, shifting this to this to this is not, these are small changes, but if they're big, if there are things we need to be aware of that you're doing that's gonna help it, that is going to help us communicate with you and vice versa, if we could get the heads up, I'm not even sure what that, like a glossary, here's a glossary of our, of the things that we're putting in.
I'm just thinking, we were thinking, she was suggesting that in our budget development summary, we have like these are the things that changed from this to here to here. But there's so many of these code changes. I mean, I can understand like the big ones, like, okay, now all of after school is gonna be here instead of here. That probably we could do.
Yeah.
But there's so many code changes that come down through all year long, that that list would be relatively large unless there was like a threshold amount, like if it's gonna affect us by X amount of dollars, do you wanna know? Right, like,
Well, wouldn't there be a record on the back end, on their end? Wouldn't, like, if the state of Vermont, I mean, this is like a public record that they would have, all
Yeah,
of these
the only
emails that they
place I
send out,
know-
and they would probably have a record of some of these changes.
what it is they have an updated chart of accounts and the business rules on their website. And they'll send you an email that says, we've made changes, here you go check it out. And you just go, when you go in, the new file is there. You
And it
don't
doesn't
see the historical
highlight- It
file.
doesn't highlight what the changes are?
There are some bullet lists that you can find that are highlighted in yellow that'll tell you this changed or this changed. You have to follow the key.
You
It's
just
kind
have
of
to search
complicated.
through it?
And see where the changes are. They're usually highlighted in yellow for us, but for you, that might not mean anything. You know, we go in and we're like, oh, that changed because it's yellow. But for you, you know, anybody else looking at it, they probably wouldn't be able to figure out what changed.
And so, last comment, we have taxpayers who are looking at these budgets and they're saying, how come our instructional has gone up $800,000? Well, in fact, it hasn't gone up $800,000, it's because of a code change.
Would probably not help them a whole lot. I mean, they could go in and look at the chart of accounts changes. It's not gonna tell
Numbers
them.
of, not our numbers aren't attached to us, how would we possibly know?
No, it's by segment. So each part of your account number in the little segments that we see on our financial reports, they would see in each segment on that report. It's very confusing to anybody looking at it.
And impossible if we're doing comparatives from
Right.
last year to this year.
Yep.
Or 2 years hence.
Right.
I sure do wish the agency would help us instead of harm us.
It's
Diana,
supposed to become a uniform chart of accounts.
just in case you have
If
your
that
ear.
really worked,
Uniform
it
sounds-
would be.
sounds
Uniform would
nice.
sound great.
Well, what percent of the 22 million is jumped around different buckets on a per year basis if you have to take a stab?
I don't know.
See, there's a huge
You
dollar
can, yeah, if you,
in the
yeah, and
revision,
it's
in the
happened
revised
more
budget
this year
column.
probably than any. I don't know. I'd have to go through and look,
It's a lot.
yeah.
20%?
What's that?
20%?
I don't know. I haven't really compared the dollar value to see how much really changes around. But we're
There's
creating
a
different
column.
codes and moving things all the time.
There's a column in our monthly expenditure report that shows all the changes,
Maybe that's it. Okay.
and it's lots and lots of dollars.
Anything else that you wanted to highlight?
Nope, that's all I've got, unless other people have questions.
Thanks for being here.
Any other questions for Elizabeth?
Just, I mean, I just would like to
One
point
more.
out, I mean, we've moved past these things so often. The reports at the bottom,
Yes.
but there's like, these reports show up every month, and like, I kind of read them, and I don't really know what they are.
Right.
I don't, I'm just gonna choose one. What is the Multiline self-audit for workers' compensation reconciliation FY19? What, I mean,
Right, right.
let's just one, let's do
So
one. I
these-
mean, there's a
these-
lot of work that happens in the central
I'm-
office
yeah.
to get these done, and I'd like to know what one is.
One of them is, right, so just to preface, there's a list of all of these documents that needs to be, that the district needs to file on a timely basis. Most of them are multiple times a year, right? And so that's what this list is each time, is just us ensuring that they are filed on time. But yes,
And it's
to your
part of the
point,
work plan,
what
is my
exactly,
understanding,
it's
just to
part of
make
the,
sure
it's
that
part of the
they
work
line
plan,
it.
right,
And so whatever falls
No,
during
this is
that
good, we need
period.
this, this is
Yeah.
really important.
right. But,
So
yeah.
specifically, the multi-line self-audit. So basically, at the beginning of, as we're entering into a new fiscal year, our insurance company sends us out a request to basically give them all of our payroll information so that they can try to estimate what our workers' compensation insurance should be for the following year.
Okay.
They do that as we enter a new fiscal year. Based on that, they charge us a premium, and we pay that during the year. And then, as we close a fiscal year, they come back and make us do a self-audit of our own payroll to find out even though they knew what our budgeted payroll was supposed to be, and that's what they based our premium on, they want us to walk through and give them all of our current actual payroll for that fiscal year, and then update what they charged us. Sometimes they give you credit if they charged you too much, not very often. And sometimes they send you a new bill, updated with a new rate for that period of time because you paid out more than what you budgeted.
Sounds good.
That's
Thank
it.
you for doing that report.
Do you want to know about any of
Really
this?
exciting.
No, I don't want to know about any of the others. And I appreciate it. I do, but I don't want to do it here.
Right,
Okay?
but they all have an
But I want to
explanation.
recognize
Yeah.
that they're all there, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep, great. All right, thank you. So, students, look, we have 4 student representatives here. Hi, guys. You guys have a report.
Yep.
Go ahead.
I'll go first. Okie dokie. All right, so I brought this up at the last report, but I think it's still pertinent to mention because as time has passed, it has only become more and more of a problem, and that is the imbalance in B days. And part of it is things like snow days and events, but part of it is the inherent imbalance of B days because half days are on Wednesdays, and because every other Wednesday switches, you're more likely to miss a B day on that day, just where the half days land, and it isn't seeming to even out, which is causing students and teachers especially a great deal of grief when you go a whole week without that B-Day class and it's hard to catch up on content, and classes like driver's ed, which has half the number of classes this year, is really starting to worry students as regards to whether or not they will have their hours or not by the time the class ends. The other thing I want to bring up was the quarter closed this year, and things are looking different as there isn't official marking period, but there's some confusion among students, if there is, especially because seniors, for them it is, as they need to get grades into colleges. Students who, in the beginning of the semester, who dropped a class or switched a class but had a grade in it, well, that class was dropped from Power School, that grade was never dropped from Jump Rope, so report cards went home to students and they had grades for classes they weren't in, which, while not a major issue, definitely is contributing to confusion around grading and how it is being done, and perhaps highlighting how, even down to basic things like technology compatibility, it feels like this whole process was very rushed with little time for the flaws to be worked out, leading to a system that, depending on how you see it, has benefits. Unfortunately, it's hard to find them for many when students, especially when the problems are what is so clearly highlighted in student life. The last thing is also with proficiency-based grading, and that is differences amongst different teachers and unclarity amongst students as to what demonstrating proficiency means. Today in my bio class, I was talking to a student and then witnessed like 5-minute argument where a student was upset because they got everything right on a test but received only a 2 because they hadn't shown work for their math problems, and were confused as to how that correlated, especially considering that because it is a math problem, they thought getting it right was evidence that they knew how to do it. So just some confusion there with proficiency-based grading. And then I think it'd be remiss not to address the votes on November 5th. And I reiterate, no matter what, it seems unfair to both 5th graders and high schoolers to move 5th graders into the high school building, not only due to space, but due to difference in development. And on top of that, teachers as well as students have brought up concerns and the benefits of waiting at least another year before making a solid decision instead of moving things fifth graders up immediately. As we have seen, change takes time, and a true process of change needs to be implemented with a clear plan so we can avoid kinks and issues that we've been seeing with the proficiency-based grading and new schedules implementation into the high school. Thank you. Any questions?
Yeah. One thing I would like to add really quickly is that we, the student representatives, are sort of establishing a more effective means of communication with the greater student body. So the most prominent method that we have discussed so far has been school-wide surveys sent out by us, the student representatives, with relevant questions to the student body to answer and give their opinion on. And so I think that it's important to mention that whatever I suppose views from the student body or happenings within the student body are right now coming largely from just our, or at least with me, just sort of speaking strictly from talking to students, just sort of around the school. So I think that that's important to mention, that it's not potentially, or that it's maybe not representative of the entire student body, but we are working on a method for that. And I think that also sort of leapfrogging off the school closure votings, that prospect has been sort of intimidating to students as worries, again, speaking from my experiences, worries seem to be rising about potential budget or program cuts. And I think that the student body seems to be somewhat ignorant about what potential, or not ignorant, but sort of a lack of understanding about what potential changes might be taking place next year. And so I think that it's important, and obviously it's probably very early to establish anything within the student body, like this could be cut, this could be cut. But I think that it feels somewhat uninformed, I suppose, maybe not at fault, maybe not feeling like the board or the administration is to blame for that, but I think that just in general, that prospect seems to be more and more worrying for students.
Thank you.
Yeah, on that theme, I would like to mention that 3 of the 4 of us, this happened in musical rehearsal, so I'm sorry that we couldn't talk to you again. We've been crazy weeks since then. Have discussed having an informational meeting for students sometime during a morning meeting period, because, well, of course we want to, plumb the depths of student opinion, and uninformed opinion is not particularly useful or beneficial. Like if you just throw up a bunch of questions that the students might not have the background information about, they can be confused. And I don't think that would be beneficial for us to find out what students think about issues, or to the student body. So we're definitely having an informational meeting, hopefully sometime this week, about what the lack of any schools closing could mean to students in the high school, with a goal to inform, so that if they choose to come to a place like this and give their opinion, then they have the knowledge to do so. And I think that that is more important for us to do than to just try to get that opinion and present it to you guys, because I think it's important for every student to be involved in the process. The musical happened. We sold out pretty much every night. It was real fun.
It was awesome.
A thing I don't really want to talk about, but I feel like it is important that the community is aware of this, is for those of you who were here last year, towards the end of the year, during my student report, I reported a number of students in racial minorities or in the LGBT community had come to me and expressed dissatisfaction with how the school responded to incidents of hate speech. And this year, another incident occurred that involved hate speech. I was personally involved in it. So I have firsthand evidence that it happened. And the response, we were brought into a meeting with the individual who used the language, facilitated by our vice principal and a member of our RC. During that meeting, we established what the student did, and everyone present agreed to have some sort of restorative justice. Following that, we have not heard anything about the situation. I understand that, like, the exacts of a disciplinary action, you know, we are not necessarily, like, have the right to know, you know, that student has a right to policy, but it was incredibly frustrating to have an incident where a student used hate speech and we had physical proof of that, and have no response that we could see. The student was involved in a sport. They were not suspended from that sport. From all of the complainants, we could see that no discernible action was taken. One of them followed up with RSC. They said that later in the date, the student said that the restorative action that we had all agreed to at the meeting would be in a hostile environment for them. And so nothing was done. And I have enormous respect for the people who work in RSC and our vice principal, but it is just unbelievably frustrating to have this happen again and for nothing to be done about it that any of the complainants were aware of. I just want to make sure that the community understands that that is an ongoing issue at the school, because this is me just going into my opinion. It seems like the school is more, maybe not the school, it seems like there's more concern about sweeping this under the rug and being like, oh, everything's okay, you know, we had a meeting, than there is about actually addressing the issue of hate speech being used in our school. And it obviously doesn't benefit the people it was used against. And I would argue that it doesn't benefit the people who used it, because if that student grows up and, you know, says something like that online, their employer could see that and fire them for that. You know, to be lax with such inappropriate behavior does not benefit anyone involved. And I obviously don't wish, like, I don't want this kid's education to be hindered in any way. It's not about vengeance for me. It's about our school has a responsibility to its students in minority groups who, you know, face harassment like this more often than I'm aware of, and B, to the students who do that, so that they're well prepared for when they step into their adult life, the consequences of those actions. And that's all I have to say on that.
I think just quickly jumping. Are you following a chain of command, a procedural mechanism to follow up on that?
I have
Aside
talked-
from
yeah.
bringing it here?
I've talked to Superintendent Soul about it.
I think this is important to bring up, especially since it came up and I've been looking into it. Our district has no official policy for what to do in instances of hate speech and harassment based upon your sexual orientation or racial or ethnic identity.
I want to correct the record. We have all required policies in place and procedures to follow them that meet the letter of the law, and I believe it does that. So we have harassment, hazing, and bullying policies.
But we don't have specifics for when it includes, when it's hate speech, we have harassment policy, but hate speech can fall under a different category due to the specific nature and history behind it, and we lack the policy for that.
I believe it does do that because it will perceive your actual category for hate speech.
So, John, I have a feeling you're looking at the policy right now.
So am I.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, we have one for harassment of members of other.
You know, it is the policy of this district to prohibit the unlawful harassment of students based on race, color, religion, creed, national origin, marital status, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, or disability. And there's a process to go through. There's another process about complaints about personnel, if you are unsatisfied with that. And it sounds like you're in that process, and I look forward to I mean, we do have these. I look forward to hearing more.
Yeah, and I really don't want to make like an official complaint about staff members, because I really think that they do their job super well, and in most cases, they're phenomenal at what they do. But I think this specific, the specific issue of hate speech, I don't think is being handled appropriately, given the severity of what it is. And what I would rather see, instead of like making a complaint and then like seeing them published, is I would like to see some, proactive work to make sure that this sort of thing doesn't happen again.
So you are working with the administration around this.
And the only reason I bring it up is not because I want any of you guys to do anything about it, but I think, I spoke on this earlier before, and I think it's an issue of culture around our school, and I think it's important for the community to be aware of that issue and to have that on public record.
I'm glad that you brought it to us for our awareness. I think you know that we actually can't do anything at this stage. But I hope that you will continue to follow up with the administration. And it sounds like we do have the appropriate policies in place.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
Can I clarify some points that one of the students made about the progress reports and grading and senior grades and all that stuff? I just want to say, yes, we produce progress reports. Progress reports are not report cards. So although for seniors, those would quarter one grades, in the case of seniors, do act as grades, again, not as a report card, but they got transferred to Power School and would get sent to colleges should they need them. There were, as Una said, courses that may have been dropped that had scores in them. We needed to wait till we made that first transfer to Power School so that we could make sure that we had there was alignment between the two systems. So there was a home in Power School for a course that a student was still in, but also it allowed us to identify if changes had been made that hadn't been recorded in Power School but were being scored in jump rope. So it's a connection thing, and we had to do it, and that quarter one grade transfer into Power School allowed us to do that. And Jay can elaborate a little bit on that. And yes, and transcripts are checked before they go to colleges. So there's not going to be just a random score for a class that got dropped 3 weeks into the semester. Although sometimes that is appropriate to leave that score there, because the student may have dropped it, but that was their score at the end of that course if it's after the drop period. So often that may not occur to students, but that is an important record of either failure to complete a course adequately or whatever. So, you can't just say it's never appropriate. There's something else that you said that I wanted to clarify about that. We can certainly do an audit of the A and the B day. There were some issues with field trips that went back to back, and students in some classes missed some days, but that was something that was school related and not necessarily related to the distribution of A and B days. We are balancing those Wednesdays. For instance, the next early release day, we flip-flopped afternoon and morning, so it will be afternoon B-day classes on the morning of the next early release day. And we have 3 afternoon flip-flops and morning flip-flops. So we're doing the best we can. I don't know, Monday's an A day, what was last Monday the snow day?
Tuesday.
Oh, it was a B day, so we would have missed a B day. But we, over the course of, I think, the semester and the year, they do line up. We have the opportunity to realign those later if we need to, if it becomes really, really unbalanced. But we'll do an audit of that for sure to make sure that we're not out of balance. I don't think we're that much out of balance. Oh, I know the driver's ed thing. There are enough minutes to drive, and every year, actually, students worry about that because they may miss a driving period. The teacher may be sick. That is always an anxiety. We're tracking that very, very carefully because we did readjust the way we're doing driver's ed. We're going to see if it works and if it doesn't. But I am 100% certain that we are going to make sure that every student has the hours they need, both in class and in driving, to get their yellow card, provided they're actually here for their driving sessions, and that that there are always those adjustments to make. Jay, was there anything else to add about the transfer to Power School at Jeffro?
I just checked the A-B day calendar, and it says the next half day is an A day, so we'll have the A day classes in the afternoon,
I just want to make sure we refocus a little bit here, that this is the student report to the board, so if you want to have questions to the administration, let's not do that at the board meeting, unless it's
I just think it's pertinent because the
relevant
answer
to that.
was, there was information in the answer that I think needed to be clarified.
Alder?
This is a question to the administration, but I was a little confused by your explanation of how grades are being translated for seniors. As a senior, it is pertinent to me, and so are grades from jump rope being converted into Power School? Yeah, and then those grades, which are in a 100-point scale, are going to be what are sent to colleges?
Start again, Alder.
Guidance counselor is saying yes.
All right.
Yeah.
I'll take that as I will take that as a yes then. Just wanted clarity.
Yeah. Una, it is an 80, but it's a flip. It's an afternoon 80.
Yes, you just said it was a B day, and I wanted to
Sorry,
clarify
but
that
my
point.
point was it was a flip.
Yeah.
Not that whatever.
And I was just saying that doesn't address, that addresses the balance of classes, but not necessarily the A-B day imbalance. But I digress. We need to stay on track.
So I want to tell all four of you that I really appreciate how seriously you're taking this and that you're putting some structures in place to get the feedback from and making sure that it's two-way communication between the, that you guys are the intermediaries between the board and the students. I think that's really great. So thank you for all the work and effort that you're putting into that. And thank you for your reports. Does anyone have any specific questions for any of the students? All right, great, thank you. So, oh, okay.
So are we in compliance with this particular incident? Are we in compliance with our policy?
Yes, we are. I mean, I don't, matters of student discipline are not.
I don't want any details. I do not want any details. I just want to make sure we're in compliance with the policy. And it sounds like maybe we need a little extra, because anyway, I just want to make sure we're in compliance with the policy.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like separate from the student discipline issue, there is some kind of, not to, paraphrase what Alder was talking about, but some kind of resolution that feels good to the students impacted by this. Separate from, whether or not disciplinary action is merited or followed up, that's a separate issue, but that's something in the end that feels restorative to the people involved. And so I think we're counting on you, Alder, to keep working with the administration, and then, as John pointed out, there's a policy that we can follow if that breaks down and doesn't work, and we're counting on you to follow that, and thank you for bringing it to our attention.
There's a confidentiality issue with the restorative process. A student is entitled to keep their transgression private. And discipline that's received is also entitled to privacy. That's FERPA.
I'm not suggesting
I
that.
mean, but that sometimes comes into play here.
Totally understood. I just mean that nevertheless, there's some folks here who I hope understand that the privacy of that individual is legally protected as it should be, but that something that comes out of this that feels like, for people who felt like they were harmed by this, that there's something that feels good for them, that could be completely separate from the individual who may or may not be, yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry this is taking so long. That is the main thing that I think is important. Like, I obviously don't really care about the exact details of what happened to the kid, like, but I think what is important is that none of the people who were affected and really harmed by this behavior felt like anything happened, and that there wasn't any follow-up that they were aware of or a part of.
Yep.
And it was incredibly frustrating, and resolution would be nice. Excuse me.
Thank you. Okay, so let's move on to board reports. Hannaford Career Center, any update there?
Not really. I attended their board meeting last week. Their big thing they're working on is starting their budgeting process. Everything's status quo there.
Thank you. VSBA.
So the resolution that this board proposed to the VSCBA passed unanimously.
Yay.
Yes, and I got couple of little plugs on the agency and how they could be helping us more than harming us. We had a keynote speaker from Battelle for Kids, and she talked a lot about a portrait of a graduate, which I thought was really interesting. It was proprietary, but she gave us this handout that broke down competency descriptions, adaptability, civic literacy, collaboration. This was really interesting, and I thought it wouldn't be a bad idea for all the board members to just take a quick look at it. There's a lot of words or descriptions in here that meet our vision, and anyway, I'll make a copy of that, or at least get it out to you guys electronically. And then I did 2 workshops, one on the study that UVM just completed on the equalized pupil calculation, which was very interesting. So they looked at all the other states, essentially all the other state fundings, and that is also in a handout, which I do not have electronically, but could get that way. Essentially, what they're saying is we need to pay attention because this study is coming out and they're making recommendations for changing the calculation, what kind of pieces we put into the calculation. And so just giving y'all a heads up, it also is supposed to come out with some recommendations for adjusting the block grant for the special ed. Which may or may not get us some more reimbursement.
Does it calculate more favorably or unfavorably as far as this?
She essentially said, this is what it could do.
Kind of a big question.
Yeah, no, this is going to be a recommendation to the legislature.
Yeah.
And she wasn't going to give us any information. And she didn't. She just said, these are the things we looked at. One of the things I thought was interesting was that with many other states, she said there's a typical approach where they take a foundation amount and then add extras, whereas we don't have a foundation amount.
Chop up kids.
We what was that?
Per student only.
Per student only. And there are 3 factors that they take into consideration, and that's ELL, English Language Learners, special ed, and I'm not going to remember the third. Reduced poverty. But that I suspect they're going to be suggesting that there are other benchmarks that we should be looking at in order to calculate this.
Okay.
And then the other one was on PBLs, and which is proficiency-based learning. And Harwood, Sheila's old school system, the assistant principal and a teacher came, and they were remarkable. I mean, they were just, I was so excited. I wrote up a quick overview of what they said were essential. And I sent this out to everybody on the board, but essentially they said, high-quality feedback between the students and the teachers is number one, absolutely, and this is the kind of thing that Elder was talking about, is that there has to be a give and take, that there is clear and shared outcomes for the students and the teachers and staff. They have a leadership team with students on it that was the established go-to people for the PBLs. And they utilize the students to be communicating to the students in the school, which they found to be amazingly helpful. They also turned that leadership team into a class, because they were meeting after school the first year, and then they turned it into a class so students can actually take it, and then the teachers are there in the classroom talking about so on and so forth. They also said they instituted a school-wide syllabi template, so that one class to another class, everybody has, this is another thing I heard by the students, was everybody has similar understandings of how, what is expected of them and also how it's graded. They suggested doing a grading guide. They suggested, well, there's a whole bunch of other stuff. Anyway, I sent it all to the board. We can put it in the minutes if people want to see it. They also said, make sure you do the decaying average in jump rope, because originally they had not done the decaying average, and they found that the kids were repeating their, with the original grading system, and I'm not sure what the difference is.
Power law was the first calculation method that we selected, and it didn't work for a number of reasons.
It promoted kids to be able to endlessly redo their work, is what I heard them say.
Well, it's conflating a couple of pieces, but yeah,
Okay.
there was also
Forgive
some
me.
work done on due dates and deadlines to help remedy that. But yeah, decaying average was a better fit for the model.
And the one thing I thought was really amazing was, I believe it was the literacy teacher, or the language.
Yeah,
not gonna get it.
humanities, Jonah.
Humanities, that they expressed that this proficiency-based learning is a long overdue overhaul of education practices. These are teachers that have been in the thick of it for years. It's either 4 or 6 years, I'm not.
Yeah, since 2014.
So 5 years. And he said that with fervor, which I really appreciated, being somebody that I don't, this PBL is new and difficult, and we're getting a lot of complaints. So I thought that was great. And they have, and they also expressed that they have been under a microscope for all of these years, and they think that they're finally coming out from that microscope point. And that the community is buying in a whole heck of a lot more than what they were at first. So I thought that was great. And the board needs to talk about how to I'm the voting delegate for the healthcare, and we have a board meeting before the deadline that the healthcare is coming out, and I gotta know what to vote, and I don't know how we're gonna determine that.
Well, what's the vote? The arbitrator
we-
picks one or the other, and we either agree
ratify it or we don't.
What if we don't ratify, what happens? We don't know.
Good darn question.
Okay,
Right. I mean,
right.
I ought to vote yes or no, and, I mean, if everybody just thinks I
Yeah.
should vote yes,
That's a good question. Let's think about that.
Do you know what's the timing?
Yeah, when
the
is
15th,
the
December
vote?
15th, which is actually a Saturday.
So we could give you guidance on the 9th. 9th, is it?
Well,
But we
don't
won't
know
have
which
any
one they're gonna
information.
choose.
Yeah,
That's
we
the
won't.
problem.
So what's the time frame? So the information comes out on you're voting on the same day that the information is released?
No,
When's the vote?
That is a good question, and I'll get back to you on that.
Okay.
The information comes out on the 15th of December.
Right.
What I'm thinking is there was 15 days to respond, but
Okay.
I don't
All right.
remember necessarily.
So it could be like Elizabeth was saying, if that, do this, if that, do, you can authorize.
Assuming that they're gonna know for sure what the two options are.
It's supposed to be out
Should've
to
been
the
out by now.
the 15th of November.
Right.
Has it been out?
Supposed
Is it
to
out?
be out,
I
and
mean, if those are
I don't
the
think
years,
that
you
it
pick
is.
which
VSBA
one, you can just kind of say,
I'm
well,
looking
if
at-
they choose this one, you vote this. If
not
they choose
out,
that
right?
Because there's
one,
only
you vote
two
that.
possible outcomes, so that's good.
So,
That's good,
you know,
right.
maybe on the next board meeting,
Yeah.
I'll spend some time before the next board meeting.
All right, so we'll put an action item. Okay, thank you. Okay, board chair, so I had 4 meetings that I wanted to report back to you all about. The first was the VSBA meeting that Lori was just talking about, and Sheila was there. It's a joint VSBA and Superintendent's Association meeting, and I had the great honor and distinction of driving one of our speakers there and back, and that was Alder. Alder was on the they had a student rep panel to answer questions from people, and it was really fun to watch him there in his element. I thought it was a great session. So that was that. On December 8th, Christina, Mark, and I sat in on a portion of a staff meeting where Sheila kind of went through.
November 8th.
Oh, yeah. November 8th. I apologize. I'm trying to move ahead too fast here. I think it was November 8th, right? Yes, so Sheila was talking about some of the restructuring process that we've been talking through and the votes and what certain things meant. And I mean, my biggest takeaway from there was that we have, there's a lot of uncertainty and stress and anxiety amongst the staff, which is understandable, but I don't know if you guys wanted to say anything else, but that was. Okay, and then on Monday, was it just Monday?
It was Monday.
Last Monday. Last Monday, Sheila and I met with the middle school teachers, most of them. And in that meeting, they advocated for taking more time to prepare and plan to have the 5th and 6th grade join the middle school. And they also spoke positively about repurposing Addison Central School and highly advised against making cuts at the high school level. That was my takeaway from that meeting. And last Friday, Tom, was that Friday?
That was
Last Friday, Tom and I met with Rick Ebel and Jess James of the Ferrisburg Select Board. They invited us to have a conversation and give them an update on where the school board process is currently. And we just had a conversation. We basically agreed to just keep communicating, and they were thinking about potentially having someone be sort of a go-between, someone who might attend our meetings and then report back relevant information during their meetings, because they're going to be keeping the topic of the school on their agendas, and their meetings are actually the day after ours, so the minutes aren't typically available yet. So they're just hoping to stay current with that. And this coming Friday, there's a meeting that I can't make that Tom and Sheila will go to. And this is a meeting that has taken place every year for a while now, I think, with the other superintendents, board chairs, and all the Addison County legislators to discuss current and future education matters before they head off to their legislative session. So there's that. That's all I have. Facilities Committee.
I don't really have much to report beyond what's in the, actually, I have nothing to report beyond what's in the report. I would say the most pressing question remains, for the committee, remains the understanding what's going on at Ferrisburg Central School. That remains in a information gathering state. At our next meeting, Ken, as we're trying to look forward towards other things and putting together a long-term facilities plan, Ken has been sharing some information with us. We were going to turn to the question of the condition of the roofs, especially at the high school, some of which are great and some of which are not so great. And then at our next meeting, and I'm telling my fellow committee members about this, at our next meeting we are likely to be talking very specifically about options for the central office, because as I think Sheila's report showed that we have to make a decision
December 11th.
By December 11th. So that's all I got right now.
Who is RRC?
Yeah, I wondered that too.
The executive summary of the roof
Ken will
prepared
share
by
the executive summary
RRC.
Prepared by RRC with the committee.
Is that a,
Oh, it's a vendor.
okay. Roofing folks, okay. Got it.
Yeah.
Bill?
What's Ken's process for, and I could call him too, but just in case you know, what's his process for getting us to where we are now with Ferrisburg and to a point where it's repaired? Is there more information? I see that we're waiting for some information about conceptual designs for repairs, but is that a procurement? Do we wait for that and then we use that to bid out the work, or what's the process for getting it to?
The latter. We
Okay.
can't put out a request for proposals.
We wouldn't know what to write
until
yet.
we don't know what we're doing yet, what we're asking for. So we're still trying to figure out what we're going to be asking for.
Thank you. So those conceptual designs will come in, then we can decide what we want to put into some kind of an RFP and then put that out.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
And there are still some mold tests that are, that
Yeah.
Katie Associates is doing, so that, and they may be done at this point, but as of that meeting, they weren't. Just, so, again, Ken is collecting information at multiple levels.
Yeah, totally understood. I trust the process, but there are folks who are wondering how long it might take before we get to the point where we could be talking about an RFP, and is there any sense of that yet? Is the conceptual design months away or weeks away, or?
So it's two different engineering firms.
Okay,
Right.
that helps.
I don't, we're in a there's a lot of balls in the air, and we depend on them to get back to us.
Yeah.
And, the very first one, I think they took 3 months to get back to us. Wolf came in April, and then, 2 months, sorry. Well, they came in at the end of April, and they sent something back at the end of June. So I'm not holding my breath, but all the reports from Katie Associates have been clean.
Yeah, that's the important part. So
And so,
it's a priority, but not an emergency.
Well, it's uncertain what needs to be done.
and until we know what needs to be done.
Right.
No, I
But-
get that. But I think everybody's of the opinion that something will need to be done, right? I mean, is status quo an option?
Nobody has suggested that
It's cheap. I don't think it's satisfactory. Right, but let's wait. Suffice to say, I appreciate that you're staying on it. I know that there are some folks who are impatient about where this might be moving, but the tests have been stable, and we want to make sure we're collecting the information so we can do this right and do it in a way that's really, truly going to solve it, because we've tried several times and not solved it.
Solving it and being able to afford to solve it.
Yep.
are the two.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So RFPs will come before a committee or for selection, right?
I would.
If we get to that point.
That's what we've done
Yeah.
in the past.
Yeah.
All right.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions for Tom?
So, I did do the review of the bills this month.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, hang on.
Oh.
I'm getting
Okay,
it.
sorry.
I'm getting to
I
it.
thought you were
And
jumping
in
up.
that review, I happened to pull a bill that was for Otter Creek Engineering, and it said assistance in the stormwater process, stormwater permit process.
Okay.
And then your committee report spoke to the stormwater process, and I just, could you connect those two dots for me?
I'm going to turn to Elizabeth, and do you know what Otter Creek was doing with I know that our permitting,
Right, we
permit
have to
is.
have a current permit that's
Right.
in place. And then there's a separate conversation about the stormwater plan for the future. So your report may be dealing with the future plan. Otter Creek was dealing with the current permit.
Re-up our permit.
Yeah,
So we had to re-up our permit.
yeah,
Thank you.
And what our permit's gonna look like in 5 years is.
will be completely different.
Is different, and we can't really do anything about that. Because we've been grandfathered into one system, and that grandfathering is ending, and we're gonna have to upgrade our, but, that's also in process. We're in conversation. The state is, or some agencies are trying to facilitate our capacity to do that at a relatively low cost to us, which, and we've had several reports about this in the last couple of years, so.
All right, can we move on to Finance Committee?
I have nothing to add. John did a great job with.
All right,
The minutes are there. We do have a policy that's ready to go, a new one, the fund balance policy.
for next, for
For
not
next
tonight.
For next time. It can be,
Okay.
it can be warned at the next meeting, and then we can vote on it at the next meeting. At 45, fund
Warn
balance
December
policy.
9th and adopt January 13th. Okay, we'll put it on there. Thank you. Okay, negotiations, oh,
I have just
Oh,
a quick question,
sorry, yeah.
related to Finance Committee. So I understand that there were some folks who wanted to talk about some, I think Matt was one of the people who came in and talked. I see him here. I wasn't able to make it. So Matt Vogel and a number of other folks had some proposals to go over. They've talked to me about some of this. I know they sent a message, I think, more generally, I think Sue got a message on it. I'm trying to understand, so we have a process for public comments, but it's kind of a, like, you know, we just sit here and listen, because that's what the structure, I'm not judging us for it, but that's the structure of how we handle public comments. What is the process for us getting some meaningful dialogue with folks who have these ideas and they want to go through them with us, even if it turns out that many or even all of the ideas wouldn't work out? I still think that it's worthwhile to go through it, similar to the way we did community engagement, where we talked about goals and priorities for, you know, how to use the buildings and things like that. Because it doesn't feel like the Finance Committee was the right route for them to use, and it doesn't feel like public comment is quite the right route for them to use. I think it serves a purpose, but not the purpose I think they wanted. Is there a process for real community engagement on the budget? And if there isn't, should we talk about coming up with some ideas for that?
So I think we are going to talk about community engagement moving
Okay.
forward.
I can hold that.
Later on in the discussion item, but
Yeah,
You
no,
want-
let's
no,
hold till then,
okay.
because it's part of a larger discussion anyway, so I just want to
Right.
make sure I didn't forget.
I would say, that conversation was great. And everybody here should look at what I linked to.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that they're going to have more. Sure there'll be more. But
yeah, I
that
don't
was
think
a
it was
good conversation
I don't think it
for
was
a good
inappropriate
while.
place to have that.
Here we had a
And
2-hour finance
Yeah.
committee meeting.
Yeah,
I think that was the right place to start the
Is it?
conversation, because finance has been asked to take the first
Yeah.
initial looks at budget issues. We now have their ideas. We wrap that into our larger budget discussion. And if we have questions or comments, we can reach out to those that created that and say, can you explain this further while we're having this conversation? But now that's part of our overall discussion of budget going forward.
thanks. I wasn't
That's new
there, so I'm
information.
just trying to wrap my brain around, you know, are we giving reasonable opportunities for this? So it's part of that will come into community engagement when we talk later, so,
But there definitely was input received,
okay.
yes.
regardless of whatever the community engagement does, we're going to have 3 budget board meetings in which we're all going to be talking about this.
Yeah, that's good, because I'm just looking at some of the ideas that if they work out, some of these could be pretty great ideas if it works out, but they're, anyway. Okay, I'll stop talking now. Thanks.
Negotiations, there's an update there. I don't have anything to add unless there's any questions about that, and anyone else has something to add. And policy,
I don't have anything else to add.
okay. Lots of new changes in the required policies, it looks like, are going to be coming down, or
Yeah.
recommended, or, yeah, okay.
I I just want
Would work.
to note,
All
you
right.
guys are amazing. I looked at those notes and my brain scrambled. Y'all are,
The policy,
yeah, the policy committee has done an amazing job, so thank you.
all of our
John.
committees are doing a great job.
Yes, all right.
All right, I think that is it for board reports, so that brings us to public comment. Look, we're only a little bit behind, all right. So we do have some public here. Is there anyone who would like to make a comment tonight? Yes, sir. Please state your name and town of residence.
Chris Caher. Went to parent-teacher conferences. They were amazing. Met with 8 different extremely qualified and caring teachers. But nearly all of them stated that they are still trying to figure out this new grading system, trying to figure out the standards, how to apply them, and how to assess them. We're still fumbling through this. I hear what Lori's saying about humanities and this being a system that works with them. It's all writing. It's all building towards writing standards. You move through the year, you get better at writing. Find a science teacher or a math teacher that supports this decaying average and this 1 through 4 system. I haven't found one yet. There's mounting evidence in multiple news reports detailing the failures of the 1 through 4 system in the few schools that are operating in it right now. It's true that this was not a report card that just went out. It was a progress report. We don't get report cards throughout the year anymore. We only get one at the end of the year. We used to be able to get report cards quarterly, that we were able to see a snapshot in time of where our students were and compared to where they should be at this stage of the game. Now, with the decaying average and the 1 report card at the end of the year, you've got to be some kind of prognosticator to try to figure out where they are and where they're going. Any of these grades that had been sent out to colleges, they're all based on the 1 through 4 system. If we're assigning a 100-point scale to them, it's done through a conversion system. And the only conversion system that I've seen is the one in the handbook. And we've been told repeatedly that this is an inaccurate way to convert these scores to grades. So we're basing, sure, it's great that we're all finally talking about the 100-point scale, but if you're basing it on a 1 through 4 system and no one has been grading within that system, and then you're converting it, it's inaccurate. This is what's been told to us for the last 15 months as we've been moving through this process. Parents, teachers, and students should have an idea of where the student is doing right now, in this snapshot of time, compared to how they should be doing at this time. There is no context in this new system. With a decaying average and only 1 report card versus 4 report cards, it's entirely too difficult to determine where they are and where they're going. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? Yes, I see a hand.
My name is Ezra. I am from Edison, and
Hi, Ezra.
I think shutting down Edison and Fayersburg is not a good idea.
Thank you very much. Are there other public comments? Yes, sir, in the back.
And I would
What's your question?
why do you have to have money to keep a school?
Did you hear him? He wants to know why you need money to keep a school open.
Oh, goodness.
Good question. Good. I bet your mom can help explain it.
Student representatives on the board.
Are there other comments? Yes.
Hi.
Rebecca Whitehurst, Ferrisburg. I was under the impression that, and I'm not sure, but at the Ferrisburg meeting that you guys had with some of our select board members, that you might have touched on the issue of possibly changing the language in the Articles of Agreement for Act 46 to change the language to state that before closing a school, that each town would have to vote, like we just did, before closing the schools, that we could protect all of our schools, including our Virgin schools, from closure without town's permission. So my question is, where does the board stand on changing the Articles of Agreement, Act 46?
I will note your question. We haven't discussed anything like that. Yes, yes, Matt?
Matt Vogel, Ferrisburg. I wanted to start by thanking the students for bringing the issue of the perceived inaction around racial justice issues at the high school to this public level. I really commend you for speaking out. It can be very, very hard to speak really hard things in a powerful situation, and it takes a lot to do that. So I'd like to encourage the board to really listen and hear more of the emotions behind where it's coming from than addressing the policy. And thank you for speaking out. It's not often where I hear my name from a board meeting, so I wanted to stand up and address specifically the section of the Finance Committee minutes where I was asked to address. Really great conversation that happened. Certainly I want to thank the board members for going significantly over time, putting kid pickups and all that other stuff in jeopardy, so thank you for really listening. John mentioned that the documents and things that we were thinking about to balance the needs of this district staying financially viable through fiscal 26 and also the town votes that recently happened are a really serious issue, and that's really hard, and we recognize all the great work that you're doing on that. I did want to pass around paper copies of another document that I included as part of the conversation to supplement the minutes and the records. And I'll just read here with the remainder of my time the overall goals for this. And just for context also, on September 9th, our communities found out that the board wanted to close our schools. It's November 11th, I'm sorry, I've been with my kids all day, November 18th. And so I really just admire a ton of work that a lot of people have done on this to help keep the schools open. So the overall goals of what this public participation from our perspective was to save the board's stated goal at the time of $955,000 from the fiscal 21 budget to ensure that ACS and FCS continue to operate as educational buildings. We also wanted to ensure the long-term viability of FCS and ACS in the Addison Northwest School District, starting with the fiscal 21 budget and recognizing the urgency of getting this figured out by fiscal 26. And the other overall goal was really to expand the trust and perception that the board is listening to and acting on community concerns. And I really want to again recognize that the board has really done a great job of listening to the community. We're at the stage where we're looking for action. You're the elected officials, we have administrators with paid positions, there are board members receiving stipends to do this hard work on this. This is going to be a really challenging period where I really feel that every functional item in the district, from administration through schools through board member stipends, really needs to be looked at so we can figure out how to be financially viable going forward. So I also wanted to, with the public comment time, recognize Bill's question and confusion around what's being recorded in public comment. I've seen public comments be listed name and public comment. I've seen public comments be listed with documents that I've provided by request from the board and other inconsistencies around listing public comments. So I'd appreciate some at least consistency going forward on what's being recognized from the public as we're engaging in this process with you. Thank you. I had to run out to meet the meeting on time, so I'm sorry if I don't have enough copies for everyone.
Thank you.
Yes, go ahead.
My name's Ben Rowland from Virgins. I just sort of had mostly just a few questions. There was a board meeting canceled, was that a week or two ago? Last week. Is there going to be a makeup meeting for that? No? Okay. And then with the resounding vote on school closures or lack thereof Is there going to be any sort of additional vote on how the board plans to move forward with the budgeting process based on a specific configuration? Because the towns voted not to close their schools as elementary schools. They weren't necessarily voting in favor of the proposed configurations that were in the flyer that was handed out and in the informational sessions. So I'm curious when and how you create the process where you decide how you're gonna run into budgeting season with a specific configuration, and how you're gonna get additional public input in making those decisions. I don't know if that's, you've already decided and what was on that postcard that everyone got is what you're running with, or if you're going to continue to get community input before making a final decision on that. So if there's any way to get feedback on those, I'd appreciate it.
Yes.
I forgot what I was gonna say before, but now I remember. I think if we close Addison and Ferrisburg and we all go to Virgins, I think there would be a lot of kids, and I don't think the parents would be happy with it. And to put Addison Central School back with the town of Addison, I don't think it should cost $1 to do that. It should cost nothing, because it's not really our property. It's whoever first had it at Addison School, it's their property. So why do they have to pay us, because it was their property first?
Is there anyone else who wants to make a comment tonight? Yeah.
I'm Jenna Samaria. I'm also from Virgins. I just had a question about the process moving forward. Is December 9th the time slot given to vote on what the school makeup is going to look like moving forward, or is that something that I misheard? I just want to know like what the time frame is going forward.
So I cannot answer that question. We are going to have a board discussion here next.
Okay, thank you.
I have received a letter by email and was asked to read this aloud during public comment. School reconfiguration could strengthen all communities. Letter to ANWSD Board of Directors dated November 10th, 2019. Dear ANWSD, everyone can get what they want. Virgins, Addison, and Ferrisburg can all keep a community school. BUES can become a community center if Virgins so desires, and the superintendent's office can rent space there. The community center can strengthen Virgins and its role as the hub of our district. We can have a middle school program locating all 5th through 8th graders in 1, 2, or 3 buildings and centrally administered. Pre-K through 4th grade can be located in 1, 2, or 3 buildings and separately be administered. One outcome could be having Addison and Ferrisburg take back 7th and 8th grades and have students stay in their communities for their middle school years. Another outcome could be having all pre-K through 4th grade in Ferrisburg and Addison and the middle school students all in the high school wing. Please create a win-win plan for all our communities to vote on. Meanwhile, an engaged community must partner with the district to stabilize and gradually grow our school-aged population. Clark Hinsdale, North Ferrisburg, Vermont. Any other public comment tonight? Okay. All right, so we will move into board discussion. Our first discussion item is conglomerate. November 5th vote results, budget priorities, policy C40 revisions. So, November 5th feels like a lifetime ago, actually, but we have not met. So, I will state that we have the vote results regarding the question of whether the towns of Addison and Ferrisburg agreed with the plan to close schools for fiscal year '21. Addison voted 373 no to 123 yes. Ferrisburg voted 884 no to 160 yes. So, that is our answer to those questions. The board will obviously respect the position of those votes and those voters by adopting a fiscal year 21 budget that ensures that there's education of students taking place within all 4 of our buildings. So that, just to be clear about what that means. And I do want to say to everyone that, you know, we greatly appreciate all of the input that we've received over the past few months. It's actually amazing to have this many people here and this many people out who care about our schools and our students. So, thank you. Our decisions moving forward for fiscal year 21 and beyond will be guided by all the input that has been received and all the input that will be received in the future. You know, sometimes these conversations have been difficult and likely there's going to continue to be challenging times. But I think one thing that's clear is that we all care about our students, and that is why we're here. So, I mean all of us, everyone. So in a little bit, we're going to talk about, or maybe in a little bit tonight, maybe a little bit tonight, and some at the next meeting, we'll talk about scheduling a new round of community engagement input sessions as we look forward in planning fiscal year 22 and beyond. But before we move into that conversation, we need to, tonight, the board needs to give some clear guidance to the administration about what types of budget drafts, fiscal year 21 budget drafts, we want to see at our next meeting on December 9th. So, assumptions are we have 4 school buildings, we have about 834 K-12 students. We want to support the best education of those students. We have continuous improvement plan goals for our district around equitable outcomes, personalization, high-quality staffing, safe and healthy schools, and investment in data collection for data-driven decision-making. We have a goal on our board strategic work plan to evaluate the annual budget for questions of equity, for example, in transportation, technology, and class size. And, of course, the budget needs to be acceptable to our taxpayers in March when we all vote. So, does anyone want to begin? In the past, we've asked for things like a level funded program, or a level funded budget, or a level program budget. Okay, so we have some numbers we can look at tonight for a starting point.
So this is our, what would we call this, our second round of a do-nothing budget. Basically, it's coming after getting suggestions from all administration. So it's not the preliminary one, it's the one after all administrators met and then gave their input and feedback back to the district. I think I got a couple here. And then I'll just pass that over to you. So basically, the budget itself is put in the format of the same way your financial reports are, summarized by function. And then I also have a calculation based on this budget draft that shows where would this put us as far as tax rate calculations, of course, using all estimates because we haven't gotten all the information from the Agency of Education. For just this round, this one draft version, like where would we be if we decided to adopt this budget, right? Like where would we be?
You just estimated tax rate for the current. Okay.
Yes, yes. And then we have a list of how did we get here? Basically, it's talking from the projections done in the August retreat, walking through what we put into that projection, and then walking through what we did before we met with administrators, and then walking through what we did to come up with this new change. And this was literally like finished today, so not finished, it's in a draft form, but basically, if you find a typo or something, please forgive me, because it was a little bit on the rush.
This FY20 revised equalized pupils, when was that? Is that our final number for FY20?
The one under the yellow highlight, FY20 revised, that's the actual per pupil number that we ended up with, which changed very late in the stages. In fact, I think it changed to that number after you had already voted on your budget for FY20, because it kept changing last year. Yep. So basically, when we first started the projection, if everybody recalls, the $955,000 figure, where that comes from is way out there on the right on the sheet that has the pink, that is the calculation sheet, like this. Way out there on the right, that figure was what was $955,000.
Yeah, that's a big change.
And then when we met with administrators, so the second round of our changing and trying to configure a do-nothing budget, we got that number down to $739,000 when we met with administrators. So from $955 to $739. After meeting with administrators and making changes they suggested, as well as recalculating the revenue, there is another piece of this that we were able to confirm during that period of time, is that Act 173 census block grant funding will not actually affect our FY21 budget. It will affect FY22. So it's been confirmed that that is a delay of that. So what that means is we're back to the same way of figuring out how much our special education revenue will be. It's based on a reimbursement model, and there's a formula and a calculation. So every time revenues change and every time expenditures change, I have to recalculate what that revenue will be. And so with that change already incorporated into here also, it brings us down to trying to cut an additional $470,000 to be able to get to the point where we're below the threshold. And if you look down at the very bottom, if we don't cut that amount, we're looking at almost a 10-cent tax rate increase. And if we do cut that amount, we're still looking at a 1-cent tax increase.
If we cut the 470, we'd be still looking at a 1.
You'd still be looking at a 1-cent tax increase if you were able to. Now, the trick about cutting the 470, and I say this every time, is if you, when we say you would need to cut $470,000 out of the current budget that you see here, that means it has to be a budget line item that doesn't affect your revenue. If you cut $470,000 out of special education, that's not going to equal the amount you need, because that's going to drive this local revenue to go down, which means you need to raise more in taxes in your education fund.
Does the 10-cent increase include the tax penalty?
Yes, it does.
So
that's added into it.
It's in there, yep.
So this list of November 2019 and then November 18th, 2019, these are all of the changes that have brought that down from
Right, so
900
basically your
to-
first August retreat is the information that went into that projection. The second bracket under budget worksheets, November 2019, that along with the wrapping to the next section are all the changes that we made to our current budget configuration after that, before actually having our one-on-one, meeting with all of the administration. So those are things that we all came up with, basically from the district side of things that we were going to change. And then this next bracket, the last bracket, is what was suggestions from administration.
If I may.
Yes, please.
It still looks, though, if you go down about halfway, amount below or above the threshold, out on the needed to avoid penalty, still shows that we're 990,000. No, we're $990 over the threshold per student, right here.
No, the $990 is your exclusions for your excess spending and your debt service. So that's what the credits are.
Okay.
So despite any scenario of this, in order to even get to the scenario where you're raising your taxes by 1 cent,
Mhm.
and you've already cut 470,000 out, you're still using all of your debt credits to do so. That's
Okay.
what that's showing you. If you want to see how much you're above the threshold, if you look at the $1,400 figure,
Mhm.
1,480,
Right.
that difference between that and the 990 is the amount that you're actually over
Okay,
with, considering your debt credits.
about $500.
Elizabeth, just to cheat and look ahead, do you have another set of these that you're going to send out that aren't a do-nothing scenario?
Not yet.
You're waiting
We're
for our
looking for
guidance.
direction.
Thank you. Okay, I just
Yeah.
want to make sure
Nope.
that.
Yeah,
thank you.
they're
I
trying.
wasn't expecting, it would have been nice if you could read our minds.
Yes, it would be.
Sometimes I'd like to do that.
I think we might all.
Only if it was collectively, though.
I'd like to know what I'm thinking too.
Right, so that's our
That's the
task
goal.
for
Yeah,
tonight,
okay.
is, we have this is something, but there may be other scenarios that we want to see numbers for, on December 9th.
Got it. Is this an okay time to ask
This is an okay
questions?
time to talk
All
about
right.
that, yes.
So I think there are two main areas, and I guess maybe I should just ask one of these and then come back to the other. So related to alternative education, Kara, have you had any time to, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot because I think this is our chance to ask the questions, but I'm coming at this with an assumption that in order to comply with the law and potentially improve services and perhaps even save money or avoid us losing money, it's really important for us to use an alternative education facility, which could potentially be the Addison Central School. There's controversy behind that, I understand, but in order for us to understand the implications of that, do you have any information that would help us to understand some of the questions I just asked around? I think I'm trying to understand, I think I've heard you say that these would be opportunities for us to improve the services for these students.
So what we're proposing is an MOU between Mount Abe School District and Addison Central School District and ourselves to educate our students. These are students that are VUHS students, Mount Abraham students, and Addison Central students in a building and versus in the counseling service, which is where they're currently housed, and they cannot stay there after this year because we will all lose revenue and funding, kind of like Elizabeth was alluding to earlier. So one of the sites, campuses, needs to take this on. And the point is, we want to be able to provide a quality educational program, both meet their social, emotional needs, and also their academic needs. And these are students that come from a tough background, either trauma or neglect or an abuse, and need a slightly different, flexible way to access their education. We would like to staff it with a STEM teacher and a humanities teacher, so we can do really project-based, flexible-based learning. They would need a school-based clinician, which they currently have through the counseling service, and a couple of BIs, which are behavior technicians, a behavior interventionist that help support the behavior plans that each one of these students has. And there would have to be some sort of director of the program that would hold a special ed, either teaching license or special ed SPED director endorsement like I hold to manage the program. And it would, currently, we are serving kids between the ages, or grades of 7th through 12th grade. And the capacity for these programs usually runs 10 to 15 students between those age ranges.
Across the 3 districts?
Mm-hmm. And then because we would have an MOU between the 3 districts when we've done this in the past, anyone who would want to apply outside of that would pay a tuition rate, which is based on a daily rate, whether they're Medicaid eligible or not Medicaid eligible, to be tuitioned in, and that would be revenue generating, obviously, for our school district. And that rate would range between $50,000 and $75,000 per student, depending on their Medicaid eligibility.
And then, I'm not trying to dominate, but I had some questions have popped up where people said, well, if we are not, Act 173 doesn't allow us to send kids out of our district, why would another district be able to send a kid into our district if we set up an alternative education?
Well, ironically, 2 Fridays ago, we received a very positive memo from the Agency of Education where they rebutted most. Redacted most of the implications they were putting on Act 173, saying we couldn't use out-of-district placements. They actually said, oops, we are going against federal law. We can't actually do what we said we were going to do, which is what we were all kind of saying to them. So this program still have to be an approved independent school or based off of school soil.
Right.
And
So this program has an issue right now because we're not basing it
Yeah.
in a school building.
Yeah, right,
Right.
okay.
Right.
And then my last question
Yeah.
on this, because I'm sure there are others. Is it too soon to get a sense for, I'm satisfied, I mean, I think it's great that we can improve services, bring these are our kids,
Yeah.
keep them in our own district, that's great.
have access to our own high school
Right.
for when they're ready to transition and take mainstream classes.
So separate from that, because I don't want to make it seem like I'm just looking at just the dollar signs here, but we are also looking at the dollar signs. And can you tell us a little bit about what that might look like?
I'm meeting with the 2 other special ed directors next week to come up with a formal budget, but
Okay.
currently it looks like it will either be budget neutral or generate revenue.
Okay, thank you.
George, go ahead.
Sorry,
I'm sorry.
a follow-on question. 10 or 15 kids, how much space are we talking about?
Well, currently they have the equivalent of about 5 classroom spaces and access to a kitchen.
Thank you.
Brad?
I'm not sure what the order is here, but Elizabeth, they're just 2 line items, the fiscal services and operation O&M plan services both jump next year. Is there any reason? And then above it, you have
Yep.
human
So fiscal
resources drop.
services jumps because we moved, if you look right above it, human resources has been
Yes.
combined into fiscal
That's what I
services.
figured.
So that's that one. And then operation and plant, I'd have to look at the individual line items, but traditionally, cost for things in, that's all your repairs and maintenance and any building improvements or adjustments and repairs that need to happen. There's no particular special project. It's kind of based on basically Ken going through and assessing how much things are costing in the current year and how much he anticipates will need to be repaired or fixed next year. Combined with increases for electricity and all that kind of stuff that we already agreed upon for
Given the way debt interest
percentages.
is credited.
With them.
The way debt interest seems to be credited against our loan funding, it seems to be a good point here. Are we capitalizing anything we can?
Well, the debt interest
Why would
is,
we expect
right.
anything?
Well, because we'd have to go out for a vote to get a bond also. In order to do it a different way, to get that debt increased, you would be going out for a vote versus doing routine maintenance. And I think what we're trying to do is not make it so there's deferred maintenance in the schools as we go along. And so fixing the little things that we can with the general budget, and so that you don't have to go out
No,
to
I get
bond
that.
and
I'm just wondering,
increase.
like,
But right, they're
strategically,
giving
we
a debt credit,
Yeah,
and
big old-
but we haven't been using it that way. We are using it in the sense of trying to calculate our tax rate, but we are not, as a district, going out there and saying we want to increase our debt so that we get more credit against our tax rate.
Can I go back to the alternative program? Bill mentioned, and discussion has been about this being at Addison. Are there other spaces? Would there be other configurations in the district that, like, for example, if we took the 6th grade, if we moved all, there are obviously a lot of moving parts here, but if we took all of the 6th grades and brought them here, could we open enough space so that the back part of Virgin's elementary school, where the kindergartners are and the music room is and the 5th grade is, there you could close off the gym space. There's a door at the gym space that you could close off, so you'd have a wing to VUES. Then at various points you open up the gym space and the kitchen to those students, and maybe that's not feasible.
I think there's lots of ways to configure it. It just depends what the board agrees upon of how you're going to configure all the schools. And once that's decided, then we can figure out space for an alternative program. I would just be mindful that the population is students who have emotional and behavioral disorders, and you may want to think about the audience that they would be having for younger children.
Sure, and that totally makes sense. I mean, given the current population of students at the high school, could they be squeezed into the high school at least for a year without it being detrimental to the, and one advantage to that is if one of the goals is mainstreaming, it's a lot easier to mainstream if you're walking upstairs than if you have to drive 15 minutes to Addison. But I don't know if there's space like the mythical wrestling room. You know, would there be the possibility of a short-term, like if we're signing an MOU with the other districts, what's the time frame on that? If we're pushing, because in one of the things that we're talking about is we're talking about kicking cans. We're talking about what are our options, what we have to change this year, what we might have to change in 2 years. If we have all 3 schools in some way open as close to what they are right now, all 3 elementary schools, sorry. For the next 2 to 3 years, would that make the possibility of the alternative program that you guys are talking about with the other districts impossible? Or like, are there, does,
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
Okay, I'll stop that.
Whoever ends up hosting it is gonna host it for a while, is what it boils down to. I mean, you're not gonna wanna redo everything every year and pick up kids and staff and move them. I mean, we all know that's hard for any student and child. I mean, we want a plan that's solid, for all of our students. So if it needs to be housed at the high school and the other 2 high schools in the county are not able to host it, then we would have to work with Stephanie to figure out where that would best occur in this building.
But I think that brings up a really good point, and I think that we want to try and be mindful that hopefully no one student or adult is going to need to move more than once through this process. That would be ideal, you know. It's not going to happen. Well, it would be ideal, that's what I'm saying.
Smallest number of moves, better.
Right.
Kara, if we don't act on this this coming year, it's probably likely that one of the other high schools would end up hosting these students?
Yes.
Because there is room.
Well, we all hypothetically have room, right?
Yeah.
So, yes, and with the way the law is and funding, well, we're not gonna lose out on revenue, like, that's silly. And what's in the best interest of our students? Well, to be somewhere on one of our campuses where they can access the wonderful programming we have, so.
So if it moved to one of the other districts, what would that mean for our district financially speaking?
We would, again, it would just be budget neutral. We would not have the opportunity to make revenue, let's put it that way.
So regardless, it's going to be a better outcome.
Assuming they move forward with an MOU model.
Correct.
So, Kara, is there a possibility, if we were the host, that we would lose money?
No.
She says no.
I don't see how that's possible. I mean,
you could elaborate by, talking about what we spend now as
Right.
compared to what we would spend, so.
So currently, what do we pay for each of these? It's per student? We pay per student?
so the tuition for different placements around the county range from $26,000 to $135,000 per child.
And in theory, if you're doing an MOU, the way that they're talking about doing this amongst the 3 districts is instead of a model where you hire a bunch of teachers, like if we hired all of the staff that we just talked about for these students, and we're paying, and we've got the contracts on all these people, and the building, the space for it, and then we're charging the other districts for those students to come in. What happens when all of a sudden they decide not to send that student, or that student moves out of their district and they no longer have a need? Then we're stuck holding the bag, right? So that's not how this is being built. It's being built where we hire a certain amount of the staff. They hire each a certain amount of the staff. So everybody is in it equally as far as what they're hiring and what they're contributing to the program.
And then
So that if they don't have students in the program, they've got their contract just as well as we have our contracts. Is that correct?
So we're all equally in, and the difference is we would charge, obviously, a facilities fee because we have a building to
Right.
maintain or part of a building to maintain. And the other piece is if there's a student from not our county that would like to apply into the school, there's a tuition rate that would just be, that would come off our cost.
Okay. So what we're doing is we're gonna be eliminating the total outside situation that we have now. It just brings it within our umbrella.
For some of
And-
the students, we do not have capacity to support all of the students that are an outside placements that are approved, like in Chittenden County.
Okay. So does that mean that if we have to still send students to other than a school facility, we are going to lose the refund on that funding?
No, that was what the memo that came out a couple of weeks ago said, that what the state was trying to impose is actually against federal regulations, Idea B, and that for the future forward, stays status quo of the independent schools and the reimbursement rate.
Okay.
Right, so those other students that are outplaced are in approved independent schools.
Okay, great.
So the state
Thank
of
you.
Vermont has 43 approved independent schools
Mhm.
that cover the 13 different disability categories that are currently recognized.
Mhm.
And those, if you send to those schools, you can be reimbursed up to 90% after $60,000.
Mhm. Okay, thank you.
I had a different topic, and I know I asked a lot of questions earlier, so if anybody wants to go first.
Well, cool. Can I say, are there any other questions about
Yeah, just
this,
finish that,
the
yeah.
alternative program?
7 through
And-
12?
Oh.
Did you say that? 7 through 12?
Currently, we're serving 7 through 12, yes.
And there's no chance of earlier grades?
We're in conversations with a placement in Burlington to possibly be a satellite district down here for K through sixth graders. But that's in the preliminary stages, have scheduled more conversations for later this week to see what that would look like.
So there was a lot of curiosity around this. Does this mean that people would like to see a budget built around this scenario?
Absolutely.
A draft, a budget draft?
Yes, definitely.
And the scenario you're
But what
referring
is
to
this
is the.
scenario?
Yeah, I think we have.
Besides
Right.
the alternative.
Right.
That's what I was
Right.
gonna ask, is,
Right.
What are the other
I'm a little
pieces?
confused, because it seems like we sent out a lot of postcard flyers before the vote, saying, if this, then this, and we kind of set out very general, broad basics. If both buildings stay open, these are the general configurations we will be looking to flush out in a budget. So we kind of gave direction already as to what we'd like to have done.
I think we need to at least explore, sorry.
Can we clarify it?
Yeah, but I mean, I think at least we have the starting point, and one of those was the alternative school, and one was K through 1 or 2, and K through 4, and then maybe 5, 6, so.
Right, so I think there's some,
You're not
just
leaving.
called it.
No.
Walking away.
They've left, what's going on?
You're freaking us out. Don't leave. I still had more questions. Right, so.
Yeah, I was gonna
so
say, I think
the
one of the
part of it
scenarios-
would be the alternative school in
At
that,
Addison
in
Central
that
School, yeah.
location.
Just to spell it
But-
right out, one of the
right.
scenarios I think we are obligated to look at is that scenario where Addison Central School would be alternative education. I know that, like I said before, I know there's discussion and controversy around that, but I think we're obligated to at least look at that option.
So along with that, what happens with, I think there's some other parts that would play into how this budget is built, though, and that would be the idea of the middle school and what if any movement
Right.
would happen at that, and then the location of the central office staff.
Yeah.
So,
I had a question around the middle school, if it's okay. So having listened to what the faculty and staff had to say, I think it raised a really interesting question that I'd like to know more about, which is, We were presuming that it would save us money and that maybe we would even really have to move at least sixth grade and possibly fifth and sixth grade up into the middle school immediately in order to make our scenarios work. And I think that the faculty and staff raised a really good question by saying, well, do we have to do that next year? What would be the financial consequences if we did take that time? And I know that's what our community's been saying, like, you know, I could get behind fifth grade, maybe, I could definitely get behind sixth grade, but all of them are saying, like, it would be great if we had more time to plan. I know we've been putting pressure on you to come up with a plan that you really just can't come up with without the time. So so now to get to my long drawn out point, one of the scenarios I'd like to understand is if we did a do nothing for the middle school move for 1 year, are there any negative consequences we should know about?
So in that model, you're saying combined with the alternative education at ACS, but move the ACS students to Virgins?
Yeah, so the scenario where ACS students would be given, the current ACS students would be given school choice through
Right.
policy C40, and then alternative education at Addison, but then not moving any of the fifth or sixth graders into middle
Right.
school. So I think that, if I recall, there's enough capacity to take 60 students from ACS
Yes.
and move them into FCS and
Yeah.
VUES. So that's a scenario that I'd like us to, and I guess it kind of piggybacks onto the ACS as a alternative education facility,
Okay.
to look at that model. Does that make sense?
Yep.
To at least look at?
So pre-K to 6 stays at Ferrisburg.
Then that means central
K
office
to
goes to
6
Addison.
stays at VUES.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
sorry.
right. That's a good
Yeah.
question.
Where
So
the
wait,
central office
say that again, pre-K
So
to?
K to 6 at
Addison goes to either one.
Ferrisburg.
is at Ferrisburg, because they already have pre-K. I assume we don't want to move
Right.
pre-K.
Right.
And then K to 6 is at VUES.
Yeah.
Addison becomes alternative school, and the high school remains as is.
Correct.
But the district
So-
office would
But where
have
Is
do we
to
that
go?
correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
We go to the high school?
No.
So,
You do
so
that.
so that would be the next moving part, would be, Christina?
It'd be
Well,
room
I'm
and
just,
time.
are we on the road to fifth and sixth definitely moving in a year?
Well, that was going to be my question, is we talked last year about moving 6, and now we're going to kick the can down the road again. If we're going to do that, then I want absolutely to have it in place that the following year, there will be a
Yeah.
move, rather than getting
Right.
to this point in
It's
12
just a matter
months
of
saying, you
how.
know
Well-
what?
Yeah.
We need more time to think about this.
Yeah.
Right, well, I think.
Because we
I-
keep having more
I think
time
you're
to
right,
think about
because
this.
now is the time, now would
Yeah.
be the more time. So the
Yeah.
decision needs to be made at this point, so that the time is there.
Yeah,
if it is.
I'm totally with you on that. I like the idea of taking time to think about what the plan looks like, but I think across the district, everybody is committed to, even faculty and staff and administration especially, is committed to doing something better with the middle school, which includes adding at least a grade.
Right, but we've been talking about that for a
Yeah.
couple, 3 years now,
Yeah.
and we're still not doing anything, and I'm really worried that we're gonna get to this point in 12 months saying, well, we really haven't done anything yet, we need another year to figure this out. Because no one likes change, and so,
Well, couldn't we make the plan that we establish that committee and task force that immediately start working on the plan for that move for next year? I mean, I thought, my impression was the middle school teachers were in favor of that plan moving forward.
That was my takeaway,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
I think
that they
felt
were in
that
favor of
legitimate
that.
time,
Right.
To design
Can-
something and get behind it.
And they were hoping that that committee would start meeting as soon as possible.
Because the budget implications for that move the following year will be positive.
How much time does it take to design this? We've got 9 months before they start school. It seems like if we can't design how we're gonna put this together in 9 months, we're never going to.
I think it can be designed. I think it's designing it and having everyone feel good about it.
And really,
gives
your
one
board
goal.
doesn't actually vote on your budget until January, so really you're talking
really
6 months or less. Right.
And we could offer community engagement around that process
Absolutely.
moving forward too. So, sorry.
I think it's
Yes,
not
interesting.
unwise to allow some opportunity for faculty and staff to pursue professional development opportunities that they feel would support that move too, if that is a possibility.
But now, if we're leaving $1 million on the table by not moving, if that's what I want to understand, because if there's
Yeah.
some I don't know that that's the case, I would highly doubt it, but if there's some huge amount of money that we're leaving on the table by not moving fifth and/or sixth up, then I would like to know about that, if it's possible.
Okay. I mean, I think that doing this budget proposal will give us that information.
Yeah.
We haven't put this together yet, but again, what's happening with the district office? So that would be the only other thing.
Right.
And again, not wanting to move more than once, wanting to retrofit space, wanting to be centralized in the district, you know.
Did you have a comment?
I'm just looking at your the superintendent's report where you list out all the kids, number of kids by
Yes,
grade.
yeah.
And it looks like there are 51 kids in the current fifth grade. So that would be next year's sixth grade.
There's 51.
51 kids, and
I thought there were 47.
there are 55 fourth graders right now. Just to get a sense of how many kids we're talking about.
110,
Yeah.
be generous.
No, 65 fourth graders.
65 fourth graders,
Roughly
and 51
60 in a
fifth
class
graders.
from here on out.
Hmm?
There's roughly
Yeah.
60 in a class from here on out, give or take. Yeah.
Well, regarding the central office, it seems to me it would be prudent to renew the lease for 1 year, knowing that we're moving forward with moving the fifth and sixth grade in 21, 22, and then there would be room in one of the elementary schools, either, or probably Ferrisburg, but for the office.
There's-
Just an
So that-
idea.
So that's a possibility, renew the lease for a year and move them when the fifth and sixth grade moves.
That-
If that's the place we end up.
That increases the lease amount, though, by,
We estimated 13%. It was at least 12.5 is what it
Because
said.
if you
So
only
we-
renew for 1 year,
Yeah.
the rate
It's
just.
2%
Yeah.
if we do a multi-year.
right.
But we currently spend 57,000, and it would be about 65. But again, know that that amount of money is going to go into any budget in the year that we move anyway. It's gonna cost us at least that to move. So-
Understood.
So
It's a
even if-
one-time cost.
One time.
Which is why we don't
Yeah.
wanna keep moving, because
Right.
you've got a wire and, you
Yeah.
know, all of those pieces to get
I
the.
just can't believe with 4 buildings at 50% utilization, we can't
Yeah,
find
right.
We'll find it.
places
Yeah, I
for
agree.
them guys.
Right. We'll
It-
find it.
It, please try to develop something that keeps the office within one of our buildings. It's,
So that's what we're saying, is that even this scenario, we want to put the central office in a building.
Yes.
But we don't know which one. Does that make a difference? I don't think it does, because
don't
we're
think
saying
it
it's gonna cost
does.
us to move
Right.
one time anyway.
Right.
The only thing that would really make a difference is knowing if we decided on that scenario, what building it was,
Mhm.
so that we aren't moving
right,
multiple
yeah.
times.
And so I guess hopefully Ken could be helpful in thinking that through and trying to locate a space that not only does not require the office folk to move a second time and more investment there, but also it limits our options moving forward with students
Yeah.
the
Right.
least possible.
Okay.
Does that?
My
That
bias
wasn't
is
very good
this is the
English,
most
but-
expensive, nicest building we have. This should be popular with students, not with administration. That's my opinion.
Agree.
Yeah.
This is by far
This
our
is the
best
luxury line.
educational facility. And like, we're gonna end up in a place, I'm gonna say these numbers again, we're gonna end up in 5 years, 4 years, where there's a high school class of 9th through 12th grade of about 240 kids. That's it. And then there's gonna be if we move 5th through 9 or 5th through 8 up here, we're talking about still another 240. That's like 75 below what we have in here right now.
That's right.
We need kids in this building, for sure.
The utilization rate of this building in perpetuity under all these plans is
Yeah.
way too low.
There's also always it would be in 4 or 5 years, the possibility of Mount A wanting to consolidate with us and come here because our building is in better shape than theirs. And they are facing declining enrollment as well.
That would
I
be wonderful if we
have-
knew that today.
I have a
And
couple
they cannot pass a bond on their.
I have a couple of things
Bring them on over.
that I've been thinking about in terms of priorities. I mean, we haven't really laid out like what our priorities are. I think we have over the course of this conversation.
Right. We already did not reiterate
The
them.
middle school, say programs at the high school especially, come in under the threshold. I mean, I think those are like three clear priorities
Yeah.
that we would like this budget we want to strengthen our middle school. We want to ensure that we keep as many of the programs that we can, especially at the high school programs. And we want to come in under the threshold. There's a couple of others that we've had typically. We need to make sure that we have a budget that allows us to meet the educational quality standards. I mean, I think we need to say it. It's really important. We also need a budget that makes choices so that we meet the continuous improvement plans and the field review reports and all of these things that we need to work on and get better at. And if this budget doesn't do that, then I'm not, I think we need to make sure that we keep that as a priority.
Right.
So I'll just add, last year, remember we had the health teacher in there, and then we took the health teacher out, and that was an effort to come into alignment with what's required by the school quality standards or EQS, and so that remains a need. We're covering those instructional elements in other ways, but it, really should be a certified health teacher that's teaching that curriculum.
Can I make two comments? One, over the course of the last 2 months, there's been a lot of comments about a bloated administration. And I want to speak to a properly full administration because one thing that I really worry about is that we cut administration to the point where you can't do your job. You need people to, I think it's important to have enough people, and I haven't heard a lot of, I'm speaking to the cameras here now. I think you need to have enough people to actually fully run a system. I think if we cut, for example, Ken's assistant, it might make him implode because there's just not enough time for people to do the work. And I know at the state that a lot of the agencies don't have administrative support. And so you've got people who should be running really complicated projects, doing stupid things like working on stop.
No, I didn't like your word choice.
Oh.
It's a reaction.
So, fair. People who should be doing complicated projects are doing relatively straightforward administrative stuff. And so I want to make sure that you guys have the support you need to be doing. I don't want you to cut the administration to the point where it's also impacting programs, because it does impact programs. But then it seems to me we've got two budget plans so far. One is the one that you've offered us. The other is the one where we put in the alternative school in Addison. But we've also talked about having standard elementary education at Addison. So if we maintain, I mean, that was what the postcard said. If we maintained that, what would we need to cut?
What would you?
So
cut
how
to
would
get
we
the
in order
470?
to get to the 1
What would you
cent?
cut to take
So,
the 470?
so this one.
So it's that one minus
with the-
470.
Minus
And
470.
seeing what we
Cut
need to
out
cut.
To be able to do
Yes.
that, yeah.
All right.
Can I just throw
So that would be a
in that-
below the threshold budget.
Yes.
Can I just throw in that the 1, 2, 3, third column in this, in the pink, the first column in the pink, even though we're above the threshold, it is only increasing the union tax rate by 9 cents, which is what we increased the union tax rate last year. Okay? And that would leave Addison and Ferrisburg as they are right now. Anyway.
So that's a 19-cent increase over 2 years.
Yeah.
So,
Well, we're not going to not do anything.
I know.
I'm telling you, that is not going to happen, Mark. the CEC is gonna take care, we are gonna get a task force that's going, we're gonna include our people, our community members, into designing something that's gonna happen next year, which is the 22.
I had a lot of people last year who said, I voted yes because you're asking for another year to figure this out.
Yeah.
If we go to a 10-cent increase, I cannot believe that it will pass.
So I think we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. We just right now need to determine which drafts we want to look at next week, and then we can talk, or I mean, next month, and then we can, discussion. No, not next week. Yeah.
Just general
That's
questions.
Yeah.
Can I ask something about these?
Yes?
Added VUHS sign lease payment no longer funded by fundraising? Are you kidding? We still are paying on that? Okay, so who okayed it to go into the budget?
VUHS.
That's what I meant to say.
We've got another 2 years of a payment on it, and there's not enough in the sign account in the fundraising to pay for it.
Well, who agreed to buy the dang thing, and then the board is gonna pick it up? That is just absolutely, when I saw that original, I'm sorry, I'm not upset with you.
Absolutely not.
$30,000 we paid for that thing, and we're still paying on a lease?
Well, it's a lease to own, so once you're done with it, it's yours.
But we've
Wait,
made
we
a
paid,
huge.
it was originally funded by fundraising, right? I don't.
Yes,
has
the
there- has
fundraising,
there
well,
mon-
the
has there
student
money-
part of
accounts
it
took
was.
care of $30,000.
Okay.
I don't think it was 30,000 that they took care of.
There was.
That might be the total cost of it, but the
So-
student accounts didn't have enough to pay $30,000.
Well, I saw
Is
a
this
check
the
in
first-
the student accounts. so
Is this the
I'm-
first time that it will hit the general fund? Or
Yes.
it has in the past? This
No,
is the first
This is the
time?
first one.
Okay.
The
So
board-
far,
The sign.
there's been no money from the general.
But the board never
Sign.
agreed to put up that sign.
That's true.
We never
So
paid that.
someone else put it up, they pay for it. There is absolutely no reason for this board to assume that obligation.
I agree.
Okay.
So,
Bill?
we don't know how much that is, right? Or you don't know?
There's two payments of, I think it's somewhere around $4,500 each. So one this year in this budget, and then one the following.
Oh, so there is a payment in this budget?
In the proposed.
Okay. But
So
not in
$9,000.
this current year budget?
9,000.
Not in 20?
Okay.
And
So
then it'll be paid
$9,000.
out.
Yeah.
So 9K. And then I also wanted to know, oh, gosh, okay, I want to bang my head against the wall. Added $20,000 estimated overtime for state mandated software conversion. Can you explain that?
We
I
have
know
to
the
convert.
software conversion is the going to this power school.
Power School e-finance. And
The
we're mandated
finance
to-
power school,
it's
not the
our-
grading power school.
It's-
I
right,
understand.
Right, I wanted
It's
to
our
clarify.
Yeah, thank you, thank you.
Yep, so we're mandated, this is the one where we were delaying and trying to be last on the list to convert. We are in what they call Group Round 7, which means we start implementing on July 1st, and we should be implementing the program on January 1st of this budget year you're building, which means fiscal services staff will be having to implement all that data changeover. And the state does not pay for your time to do that. And we have hourly paid employees. So
That's what, it's hourly.
it's hourly people. I'm free when I work overtime.
Yet another unfunded mandate. Thank you very much.
Bill?
So we have a fairly, I mean, I think there are a lot of open ends on the one scenario, but then the other one I think that we're talking about is if we go with the do nothing, where, you ask, where would we cut the 470,000, assuming we wanted to?
Right.
Because one option is to just raise taxes, but I don't know
Right.
that the board has an appetite for that, so.
Right.
Well, whether or not we do, I don't think the community does.
Right.
So cutting the 470,000, it would be great to have a scenario where we can look at keeping, at least look at this model of keeping the grades where they are in each of the 4 schools, and finding a way to cut this without cutting programs. I think,
Sorry.
I'm just saying it out loud. But I think there are people,
Is that
but I do think there are
realistic?
people in the community who want us to look at that option. And also to take into account the ideas that were delivered to the finance committee by this group. I'm not, if if each one of those can be, individually looked at and said, here's why it won't work, well, then that's an answer. But maybe some of those, I don't know, I mean,
So there is some central office
Yeah.
reductions on this list here.
Mhm.
Here's a 1.0 FTE support position.
Mhm.
That's already been taken out.
Yeah, I'm not saying like that you have a big chest of gold somewhere and then we're just telling you to give it up. I know that that's not the case, and I know that we've been through, almost a decade of incremental cuts year over year. So I don't know, I mean, do we have to we came up with some ideas, like we could cut, I don't even say this, but we could cut busing in Virgins, or anybody within a square mile of, I hate to start whittling away at this, but in order for us to get that 470,000 down to zero, that's going to require something that's going to come with some pain. And I think we need to know that so that when we're deciding which scenario to ultimately go with for C40, we know, like, this one's got pain.
Right.
They all have pain.
If that's the direction you send us off with, we're meeting tomorrow, and we will get to work on bringing forward, a priority list of what administration would recommend in terms of those cuts, so.
Don't do it just based on, I'm just giving my 2
so
cents.
here's what, so here's,
Yeah.
I
I
mean,
got you.
so I'm
Thank you.
hearing, so we have this do nothing, we know what the tax, that is an option.
Yeah.
What the tax rate increase would
We already
be
have
on
that scenario, right.
Another idea that a couple folks have brought up is taking that budget, keeping everyone right where they are, and reducing the additional 470, what would that look like in terms of our operations and programming? And then their third idea I'm hearing is to look at the budget with the alternative school at Addison Central, with a commitment to move 5th and 6th grade up in another year, and trying to figure out where central office might fit in. Is that an accurate,
I missed the first one.
George? The one we already have.
Oh, so do nothing and then do nothing and reduce the 470 and.
Increasing the tax rate.
Right.
Right.
You've already got that one.
Yeah.
Right. George?
I gotcha.
Oh, sorry, George.
So I'm thinking, being from Madison, and looking ahead, there are only 6 4th graders and 6 5th graders. And, some parents have already made use of the choice option to send some of their kids to Virgins or Ferrisburg. So I'm trying to anticipate, if there are only 12 kids in the combined 5th, 6th grade classroom next year, is there any way to poll the parents and see, some of them may be saying,
That's too small for me?
that's
Yeah.
too small for me. I mean, we've already heard that from at least one parent. And so I'm gonna move now. I mean, so then, let's say 3 kids move, we're down to 9 kids in a combined 5th, 6th. I mean, is that serving the best needs of the kids? And
People, it would be non-binding, of course, right?
well, for planning purposes, it might be
Right.
helpful to know what people are thinking. I guess that's what I'm trying to get at here.
Well, I mean, that class will certainly be below our optimal class sizes.
Oh, yeah.
You mean 5th and 6th
That 5th
combined?
and 6th grade class at Addison will definitely
it's
be well
combined.
below.
It's a
Yeah.
combined,
Yeah,
yeah,
it'd be
but even
12.
so.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it'd be 12, which was
Right.
lower than 15.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
And then,
would you want to change the policy so you move the 5th and 6th
well,
out?
I don't know, and then here, another question, I guess, for the public and the audience. I mean, at what point do we say, and I understand the public voted and said, we want to keep our school. But, if we end up with 40 kids, 30 kids, 20 kids in the school, I mean, at what point do we say enough is enough?
So I will,
And-
if I can just speak to that just briefly, because I did ask administration for input on where our district is currently struggling with in terms of equity, because that's what you're really getting at. Like,
Yeah.
at what point is it not?
It's a detrimental to the kids.
And they just highlighted a few examples of where there really just isn't equity. So for example, last year, as part of this process to get to a budget that we put forward, we reduced further art and library at Addison. And that took away enrichment for those students that They just get the bare minimum of art and library now. So no coding, no makerspace, and the librarian's only there one day a week. Whereas in the other schools, you know, if a kid just wants to pop by and get some help picking out a book, you know, there's someone in that office, in that library to provide those things. Ferrisburg does not have a full-time librarian, but VUES does. So that's a difference, and enrichment is still happening in those other schools. One of the primary concerns for everyone on our team is the lack of teaming opportunities in the small schools to provide universal instruction. So when we think about providing the best first instruction for students in the classroom, when you're in a larger school, you can team with someone else that teaches the same grade as you and share kids differently to meet their needs. So you can develop different smaller groups of instruction. And there are just more supports in general of grade level teams in those other places. So that's, again, not happening at the smallest schools. And then when you have placement considerations, so you have currently, I think there might be just 2 girls in the 5th grade at Addison, and there just aren't any options, you know, when you have a class that small. And then they just highlighted some other inequities with the schedule, science, social studies, recess, length of day, that kind of thing. But I'll just add that.
Yeah. One of the scenarios includes moving the central office, right?
I thought that we asked for that with,
Yeah, okay.
with the alternative.
I think that would be,
Yeah.
I think that would even be if we came up with how to cut the 470.
Mhm. Yeah.
Because the amount that's sitting in there as a placeholder for rent is really for us to move also.
Right,
like-
right. Yeah, I want to make sure that we're seriously considering
Yeah.
that move.
We got you. We heard you.
Just, you know, to your points about equity, I wonder if even in the scenarios where we don't change the, where kids go, you know, if we keep K through 5, K through 6 at every, all 3 of the elementary schools, if we opened up school choice for Addison folks, even in that, I mean, if we go down that scenario, for people in Addison who are feeling like there isn't equity that they want, open it up so that you don't, if you want to go to Virgins or Ferrisburg,
Right.
you could. I know that they take advantage of I think, all of the move slots available now. I don't know if that's even the
Yeah.
right way to put it.
Yeah, so, we've not exceeded the capacity. We've been able to accommodate the requests, provided they come in time. Is that what you're getting at?
That's
Yeah.
what I'm trying to get at, but that even if, so if we had a scenario where C40 perhaps changed to, if you live in Addison, you can choose whichever of the 3 schools you want to go to, if we end up keeping Addison as, in some elementary school capacity next year, if we go with that scenario. What do you?
Right, we already
No, I mean, it
have
does.
that.
I mean, as long as we have more than one elementary school, we'll always have school choice.
Sure, right.
So we may have buses that only go from one place to another place, and that would be a decision
Yep.
that the superintendent would make. But we'll always have a policy that allows people to make choices between the elementary schools.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Brad, go ahead.
4 of the 5 towns in this district are in the top 6th in homestead property tax in the state. Top 15%, 4 or 5 towns here. We have a student to employee ratio of staff of 4 to 1. Do we have any idea if that is a really good number? My guess is it probably isn't a really good number. So when we're given this, which is very hard for anybody to determine what to do, we don't know what schools these represent or anything, it's very difficult for us to say, oh, let's cut this, cut that. Is there any strategy that we can start to implement with fiscal '21? Certainly, as a finance committee, we're trying to think longer term and put this all together so we can think multi-years. We're thinking about productivity and right sizing. Is there anything we can apply to this spreadsheet for fiscal year '21 where we can start addressing the fact that we are in and of itself already in the top 15% of taxpayers in the state? All of the neighboring towns around us, by the way, for people out here, from Middlebury to Cornwall to everywhere, pay much less tax, on a homestead basis. So from tackling kind of from a bigger issue down, can we at least nibble on fiscal year '21 with that attitude of how do we just kind of smartly, through whether it's productivity or right-sizing, however we want to look at it, rather than chopping away at line items, can we think holistically of how to make it a smarter approach so that we're making decisions today that benefit next year, that benefit the year after? It doesn't feel that way. It feels like we're in a hurry to just kind of, okay, well, that number looks too good, let's get rid of that. And I don't know whether that's a good decision or not. It could be, but I don't think we have enough information as a board to be deciding smartly that we're making the right choices.
What's the alternative?
You know, I think actually though, I don't disagree with you, but I think we have two different problems. We have an FY21 problem, and we have an FY22 to 26. And I know they're part of the same thing, but I think that in some ways we should be having two conversations. One is about FY21 because we have to give them guidance, and we have to, and there's a really tight timeline, which is why we started this whole process in August, because of precisely this timeline. But if we're not also beginning to have a more structured conversation about what FY22 to 26 looks like, then I think we'll have missed an opportunity. But I think but I don't think we can have an FY21 to 26 conversation. At least not that's productive in the timeframe that so maybe the question
You're saying
is,
we need to get through fiscal year '21.
but not ignore. But
Right.
I can't. But we can't wait till till March to have that to begin this conversation. So maybe
Well,
the
I'd like to go back and say, since August 22nd, we've known fiscal year '21 is here, no matter what form it's come in. We've had since August 22nd, when I joined the board, to determine how to think smarter. And we've been saying, well, let's get this over with, and now we're here. And now fiscal year '21 is right in front of our nose, and now we're saying, well, we have more time to deal with fiscal '21. I would have said, yes, we did, back in September, whatever it was, that we can always be thinking about the process. Does anyone here know if a student to staff ratio 4:1 is competitive? Does anyone here know that?
It's very high. We know that. We know that.
But does
And
anyone
that's
know-
why we're trying, that's the goal behind the consolidation of students, right? Is to increase that. That's the goal behind the class size policy, to increase that ratio.
I would say our class size ratio is really small. And it is a part of a problem that pushes a lot of pressure on our budgets. And I'm not saying we need to go and have 25-person classes, but we've got to push it up a little bit more. And it's also, I think, good for kids as well. So I think there's two strategies here that are going to help us in the long run. One is a real alternative education at one of our buildings. That's good for us in the long run. The second is this board needs to make, I believe, a choice now, whether we do middle school next year or this year, but that is going to set us up to be able to think more long-term. Well, more will be here. We'll use this building in a better way, and that's just another way that helps us get to 2025 when we're going to lose another 100 students. And I know what you're saying. I think you're right. I mean, we're going to come back as a public. We're going to come back as a public, and we're going to have to look at the elementary schools again, and it's not going to go away. And so I agree with you about getting, those are two.
I didn't necessarily imply that.
Well, I mean, those are going to be our choices.
Do you have other ideas for other strategies?
Not for this meeting, but I am saying that for fiscal year '21, we have to cut $470,000, and we're all just kind of saying, well, what about this, what about that, what about that? And
So we're actually not. We're saying, bring back a budget proposal that's
So I think-
$470,000 less.
I
And
understand.
it would be,
I think what you'd like to have administration do is while they're looking at that $500,000 is to think of it strategically. Not just, well, we can cut this thing and that's gonna save us $200,000 and that's an easy number, but it might hurt us in the long run.
Yeah.
try and figure out.
You know, I've been saying this since I joined the board, is that until we start benchmarking and understand what other schools are doing, the best ones and the worst ones, and have both a relative and absolute idea of what's the right thing to do. All I can tell you is we are top 15% of taxpayers in the state. And we are scrambling to keep it that way, not to bring it down. And I've said before, if all of the neighboring towns around us have lower tax rates by 10 to 15 to 20 cents, that is a competitive disadvantage for us as a district, for us to keep this school system competitive and growing.
Yeah.
And I think these are big issues that we need to be grappling with in all of our meetings, maybe not directly, but in all the things that we're thinking about with the school, that it's bigger than just Virgins or bigger than Ferrisburg or Addison. It's how do we work collectively to get the train back on the track and move it forward. That's my personal opinion. I'm sure the board doesn't.
I think we all share that opinion.
I think that's why one of the things that we talked about that was really important as a board and that finance committee was that we really need help from Violet, from the director of curriculum learning, to help us figure out in a better way what programs we have and why they're working, and what programs we need to be better and to have a better education for young people. We have to do that in a better way. We just have not had that person to lead us through that, and we really need it.
And the benchmarks you're talking about from a quality standpoint are the education quality standards. So that's the work we're already engaged in.
Financial.
No, that's what I said, from a quality perspective.
Something I failed to report in my VSBA report was that there's 2 Addison County reps, and the other one is from Mount Abe. And he wrote me an email. We're trying to do outreach. He wrote me an email and he said, our district board has been having a series of community conversations, which everybody knows, facilitated to better understand the mood around declining student populations and facilities underutilized. In parentheses, at the one last week, someone specifically brought up consolidating Mount Abraham and VUHS. We have our final community conversation on Wednesday, and it's likely this topic will be brought up again. I'm seeing that from these meetings that local elementary schools in each town are very important to those that are active in the process, at least emotionally, if not logically. Not news to you. There doesn't seem to be the same feeling about the junior/high school. So one of the things he and I are talking about is visiting with Middlebury to communicate what's happening at the VSBA board. But what came out of our conversation was that all the boards, he actually copied their board chair on the email that he sent me. But what he's saying is the boards all need to work together, and because this is a county problem. This is not just.
Well, it's good to hear that.
Yeah.
That they're starting to be perhaps more open. Right. Because I did a recent conversation with the Addison Central Board, and we're not indicating that openness at this point.
But we're going to keep at it, and Tom and I will go this week.
But Tom and Sheila are going on Friday, so.
I meet regularly with the other supers, and we just keep at it. We're meeting with Dan, the 2 other superintendents, myself. We're meeting with Dan French and the director of the VSA, the Vermont Superintendents Association, as soon as Patrick gets back from deer hunting.
You've got this great alternative program MOU.
Right, and I think I've mentioned this before, but I'll mention it again when we go to the regional superintendent's meeting, which is Addison County, Chittenden County, Franklin County, Grand Isle. Our region has the most examples. This is a topic we've been talking about regionally. How do we spend our money more wisely? How do we look for opportunities to share costs as a region? And our county has more examples of that through food service, sports, and other things than any of the others. And so we've already done a good job with this, and we need to just keep going. But it's chipping away at something that I think eventually needs to be solved. through governance changes or other, we can only go so far through that, to sort of to Brad's point, what's the long-term plan? But, so it's a yes and kind of conversation.
Said to him in the original email was, why aren't we getting a countywide task force together?
Right? That's the yes and conversation, right? We should be having that conversation too.
Absolutely. Because
Probably it's gonna be some combination of all of these things that helps to address the problem. And I don't know that anything's gonna solve the problem, right, but help address it. And ultimately, from my point of view, as I've said before, it's about maintaining the program, the learning opportunities for students first and foremost. That's what I'm most fearful of going forward, is losing those opportunities for students in the region.
Could, we have, I think we have some.
I think we have some guidance.
Yes, I think this is good.
You go ahead. But
Well,
have a question,
I was
too.
just gonna, I think, when we get done, what are the next steps for the budget? Because this is the first conversation, real
Okay,
conversation.
So before we go there, let me ask a follow-up
Okay.
question here. So and I actually don't even want to ask this, but there've been a number of things that have come up throughout the course of this year that people have said, well, let's do this, let's do that, and they all cost money. So I just want to throw out some of those things and see if there's any areas that we actually want to add to the budget. So some of the things that have come up are money for a consultant to assist with community engagement or facility use planning. Money for community engagement, whether that's with a consultant or without a consultant. I don't know if well, I guess we're already budgeting. And I guess the third one I have is, it had come up that we don't have RETN at all of our meetings, and because we don't have a line item for that, so I don't know if there's any interest in, adding to the budget. Not really what we want to be doing, but I just want to put that out there, that those are questions that have come up.
Do you want to see where the numbers come in next time and just think about it in the interim? Because you can always have us add.
Okay.
I have a quick question about the budget. In here on pages 3 and 5, student transportation to and from school and student transportation co-curricular is listed twice, both with the same case number, but with different pricings. I was wondering what was up with that and if there's some way to save money with that, or if that's like an accounting.
So on page 3, that's from the general fund, so that's general regular education. And when you move to page 5, there's transportation again, but that's for special education. So it's just a different group of students in their transportation.
While you're, Elizabeth, I asked this earlier, and maybe I wasn't clear, but this budget has a difference between the adopted budget and the proposed budget. I was thinking we should be comparing it to the revised budget, should we not? Since we've had so many gosh darn revisions.
Well, that's a different,
Is it possible for the software to do that?
Yes, software will do it. A lot of times, we've heard the opposite of that, because the adopted is what voters approved. People want to know what it's changing from what it was voter approved to be to what it is being proposed to be now. So,
Yeah,
I've heard
but,
the opposite of that. So yes, the software will do it if people want to see that, but, yeah.
Okay, so what are next steps? So next steps, December 9th, we will have, it sounds like we have one of them already, 2 additional budget drafts. And at that point, we really need to make a decision on which route we want to go, which of those 3, because then we have 2 meetings in January where that selected option can be refined and, brought to a vote. And at that same time, we'll have more answers about policy change.
Yeah.
And community engagement
Right.
direction.
Next time.
For next time.
Right. Do you want to speak about it now?
About the policy? Yes.
Okay.
Let's do that. Look, you all saw the C40 that we looked at. Clearly, some things have changed, right, because we did this before the vote. So, you know, one thing that would definitely change is Ferrisburg Central Schools not coming here, to Virgins, excuse me. So that one's certain. My view is that if we do an alternative education, or we move Addison Central School, and we say that there's going to be a alternative education there, and Addison Central School will have, their home school, their first school would be Virgins Union Elementary School. I think our best bet is to write it here. Because look, I've looked around all over the place to figure out how school districts tell people where to go to school. It's either in the Articles of Agreement, and it's not in our Articles of Agreement, so we're not going there. It's either written just like this in some sort of policy out at the front where we just say, here's where they go, Middlebury is a model like that. And there are other things, there are other ways to do this. We could just say, we are going to have schools that will have homes based on transportation routes. And then there's this whole long list. And I mean, I'm literally, if you want to see something that's crazy, you go to Mount Mansfield and you look and see how they send kids to different places. They're like, if you live in Bolton and you live on Browns Ferry Road to this marker, you're going to go to this school. I mean, so there's no way around us not like saying it out loud exactly where people are going to go. So we're going to have to vote on this.
Right.
And we expect that process will be that we'll bring it forward as is, like this, at our December 9th as a markup period, and then we'll warn it after that, and we'll vote on it on January 13. Some people were asking about that earlier.
Yeah.
John, is there a reason why this has to be done before June 30th, 2020? The end of the fiscal, so this is something that's going into effect for next year. Does the policy have to change before? So I'm just wondering, if we're trying to change the policy before we need to? The policy needs to be in effect for next year, but.
For the next school year.
For the next school year, but.
July 1st, yeah.
Don't you think parents want to know as soon as possible?
We pass a budget based on what we
And
think the policy
school
will be,
choice
better at the
shows
policy.
up soon.
Right.
School choice shows up, that's why.
There was a
Okay.
reason.
Okay,
Yes.
fair.
That's right.
Yep, that's fine.
What about using the lottery?
Okay. Okay.
Some schools do that.
Christina, sorry. Do you want to talk at all about community engagement moving forward, or do you want to wait and see where we end up on December 9th?
Well, sure.
I'm not trying to put you on the spot, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
No, I mean, I've drafted out some ideas and thoughts, just in preparation for what's going to come up down the road. And formal engagement process will really be dictated by what we decide on December 9th, I think. But I think at the very least, I would like to schedule a community engagement committee meeting after the December 9th board meeting, knowing then, what kind of direction we're headed, and then examine a series of topics and ideas on moving forward, what we could.
I think that's an awesome idea. I think as we all now know, last year we did this and you had a, decent turnout. I remember
Yes.
prior to being on the board coming and really enjoying being a part of that.
Yeah.
Imagine what it's going to look like this year. It's
Right,
going to be
right,
amazing.
right.
We've got so many ideas, and I think there's so many ideas that are happening that don't yet have a clear direction. And if we
Yeah.
don't become that direction,
Yeah.
those ideas are still going to grow legs. So we might as well all do it together. And I know Jess James and the Ferrisburg Select Board folks have been talking about that as well. And I know the other, the other local governments would probably feel the same about just, we've got to give people direction for all these ideas. And so that's awesome, Christina. I think
Yeah.
that's brilliant.
And I mean, I'm thinking like at least 3 events in January,
Yeah.
February, culminating in some kind of summary report that the school board and all of us will have, and the community, by sometime in April. So as we immediately start working on 22, 20,
Yeah,
to
that's awesome.
26, we'll have some feedback. So,
Thank you.
So then the community engagement committee meeting would be beginning to formulate a plan for how to talk about 22 to 26. Does that seem
Essentially,
reasonable?
depending on
yeah.
whatever the topics.
So
you know.
right, okay.
There's a whole long list that,
Well,
to
but
talk about.
I
like
think
what-
we need to be having a prospective conversation, which
Right.
is, where I'm in agreement with our
Mm-hmm.
colleague here. But just want to clarify that that's where this is going to start.
Right.
Okay?
And I think the board needs to give direction, like exactly what topics, ideas
Yeah.
you want to
Yeah.
get,
Yeah.
engage about, yeah.
So that's something we should talk about on December 9th?
Yes.
To give guidance
We-
to
yeah,
the
that makes
Community
sense.
Engagement Committee?
Yes,
Great.
yeah, yes.
A quick question, is there any chance that elementary school choice between districts is ever going to be a thing?
Not in the current governance.
We have it for high school. I just wonder why we don't have it for middle, or grade
This
school.
is the state.
It's a state thing, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, are we good on that one? Okay, so we have a couple other just discussion items, but they don't necessarily have to have a lot of a discussion. We had an update on the board goals on our strategic work plan. I put just some updates there in blue on that document. I put them in the metrics column because, not necessarily because they're all metrics, but because that was an empty column and they seem to fit nicely in there. But it's just links to documents that we created when we did some of the goals when we worked towards some of the goals that are on that plan. So I can take questions or just take a look at it if you haven't had a chance to. And if there's anything that's inaccurate, let me know and we'll change that.
It's nice to see the boxes filling in.
Right, I know, we actually did some things on that. And then you all have a link to the results of our annual board self-evaluation, and, it looks very fair and reasonable to me. Certainly, there's some areas that we are actually, in fact, most of the areas that are, that had some discrepancy are areas that we actually, I think we actually are currently working toward. But certainly, that looked like a fair representation to me. I don't know if anyone had any comments on that. All right.
A third of us didn't take the survey.
A third of us didn't fill it out, yes.
That's very
That's
disappointing.
true.
Even
That
with
is
small
true.
stats, it's hard to make conclusions.
I know.
It's even harder when we're missing a bunch.
Right.
I filled it out late when Gloria yelled at me.
All right, so that brings us to, we need an executive session for purpose of discussing labor relations agreements with employees. The premature knowledge of which would place the board.
For purposes of 1 VSA
Invite.
13A1B.
I'll second.
Inviting the superintendent.
Inviting the superintendent.
Superintendent.
And I'll second.
So we have a motion and a second. All in favor of going into executive session, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? Thank you. All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming.